For 20 years, the captain had been taking convicts out into the snow to die. He had seen generals weep and soldiers gnaw at their own hands from the cold. Not a single condemned man had ever survived to see him again after 24 hours. Yet here was this young lad, sitting in a warm snow house by a burning lamp, calmly telling him that the captain's left cheek will be eaten away by necrosis in a day, and that he knows how to treat it. But let's rewind a day. The cold strikes before consciousness returns. The body lies in the snow and no longer shivers. A bad sign. When the body stops shivering, it has given up. The brain shuts down the muscles and conserves the last of its heat for the organs. Stage 3. After that, only death. The eyes open. A white sky. Gray rocks. The wind hurls icy shards into his face, and every breath burns his throat. His fingers won't obey him. The legs lie like two foreign logs in the tattered remnants of silk. Silk. In the freezing cold, someone wanted this man to die beautifully. He sits down. The world sways and something foreign floods his mind. Strangers' faces. A throne room with columns of red stone. An old man on the throne with lifeless eyes. A young man in black silk smiles in a way that makes you want to take 3 steps back. Chains on his wrists. A sentence. The word treason is tossed out casually, as if talking about the weather. A cart. The road. Snow. A plateau where the escort removed the chains, threw down a thin fur coat, and walked away without looking back. Prince Lee Dohyeon, 19 years old, the emperor's 3rd son, exiled to the White Death for a treason he did not commit, sentenced to a death no one will carry out. The frost will do it all itself. So says someone else's memory, but his own says otherwise. His name is Alex Chen, 34 years old, an engineer with 12 years of experience working where the locals see the end of the world. And this is where the strangest part begins. He looks at the snow and sees not death, but material. 35 below, wind 8 meters per second. Without shelter, a boy's body lasts 3 hours. With shelter, 6. With warmth, you can survive. The plan unfolds in his mind like a program. The rock's temperature, the snow's density, the wind's direction. There's a crack in the rock, 1 meter wide, 3.5 meters deep. Protection on 3 sides. Inside, it's 6 degrees warmer, no drafts at all. Basically, this will make a house. He stands up. His legs are shaking so much that his first step turns into a fall forward. The prince's body is frail. Slender arms, narrow shoulders, not an ounce of muscle to generate heat. The heaviest thing this boy has ever lifted is a calligraphy brush. But the brain inside works differently. The brain knows that panic kills faster than the cold, that movement is warmth, that snow at the right density is the best insulator on Earth. A needle. A dome of snow blocks keeps the inside around 0 even when it's -50 outside. He needs the right kind of snow. Dense, wind-blown snow. He looks around. There, 30 paces away, the wind has piled a thick tongue of snow against the rock. The texture is perfect. 4 hours of work if he can find something to cut with. Something. He looks at his hands. A ring glints on his index finger. Heavy. Gold. With the I family crest. The mark the convoy will return to when the body freezes. He pulls the ring off. The sharp edge of the setting will do for marking. And the flat stone at the entrance to the crevice cuts better. a natural scraper. He chops at the first block for 12 minutes. Uneven. His hands are shaking. The second one comes easier. By the 10th, he's found his rhythm. Strike, cut, pull out, lay down. The system counts in the background. Base, 2 meters. Dome, 1 meter 70. Wall, 20 centimeters. The entrance is below floor level, so the cold flows down and the heat stays up. A fist-sized hole in the dome, otherwise the carbon dioxide will suffocate him. He loses track of time. Sweat beads on his back under the fur coat, and that's deadly. Wet clothes in the cold are a death sentence. He rips off the fur coat, turns it inside out, hangs it on a ledge. His body loses heat immediately, but movement compensates for it. By dusk, the igloo is ready. A low tunnel, 1.5 meters high. A sleeping platform 30 centimeters above the floor. He takes the nearly dry fur coat, climbs inside. The wind disappears instantly. Silence. The system reads -12, 23 degrees warmer than outside. Enough to stay alive. Not enough for warmth. He needs a fire. A fat lamp. A container of fat and a wick. It burns for hours, raising the temperature by 10 to 15 degrees. Where to get fat? He closes his eyes and rummages through someone else's memory. The convoy ate on the road. Lard. One soldier tossed the scraps by a rock and said the prince wouldn't need dinner. He crawls back out into the wind. It's getting dark fast. He finds boot prints. Under the snow, bits of lard, tendons, cartilage. Leftovers that gave the condemned man life. He returns. The stone with the hollow becomes a lamp. The lard is laid in thin slices. A wick made of a strip of silk twisted into a cord and soaked in fat. Now, a fire. There is no flint. That is part of the sentence. Without fire and white doom, a man is dead. But there is a ring, and there is a rock. Gold is soft, will not give a spark. But inside the setting a steel clasp holds the coat of arms stone. He pries out the clasp, a thin steel plate, and the rock at hand is quartzite. Steel against quartzite gives a spark. It's physics. 3 strikes. 6. 12. On the 15th, a spark falls onto the fluffed silk in the fat. A wisp of smoke. Then a flame. Small, yellow, alive. He transfers the wick to the lamp. The fat melts. The flame grows stronger. The needle brightens, and 10 minutes later warms up. -8. -5. -2. At -1, he stops counting. It's livable. He lies down, wraps himself in his fur coat, and watches the little flame. Somewhere, in another world, engineer Alex Chen died beneath the ice of the Taimyr. Here, in a world where winter lasts 8 months and power belongs to those who control fire, he lit a light. From scraps of lard, from a scrap of silk, from steel and stone. He does not celebrate. He feels hunger, fatigue, and a dull ache in every joint. But he is alive. And tomorrow, he does not merely survive. He builds. Not a fortress, not a shelter. A home. He wakes to footsteps. Not one person, several. Heavy boots crunch through the snow from the entrance. The system activates. 20 meters away, 4 or 5 of them. Heavy footsteps, meaning they're in armor. The pace is unhurried, so they aren't running. They're searching. He sits down. The lamp is still burning, enough oil for an hour or two. His body aches so much that every movement is through clenched teeth. His palms are cracked, and blood has caked in the fissures. But his head is clear. The convoy has returned for the ring, but the captain said 3 days, and only 1 night has passed. So either they came back early, or these are different people. The footsteps fade. A voice, low, hoarse, surprised. Someone utters a word that memory translates as impossible. They found the needle. In the middle of the barren plateau, a neat dome with a chimney from which steam curls. It's impossible to miss. A shadow blocks the entrance. Dohyeon doesn't move. Nowhere to run, nothing to fight with. A face appears in the opening. A man in his 50s. A weathered face crisscrossed with a web of frostbite scars. A white patch on his left cheek. 2nd-degree frostbite. Fresh. Memory recognizes him instantly. Captain Yoon Sung-ho, the very man who brought the prince here to die. 20 years on the border of the White Death. He brought hundreds of convicts here, and not a single one survived to see him again the next day. The captain freezes in the doorway. He looks at the lamp, at the charcoal sketch on the snowy wall. It's a diagram of the shelter's expansion that Dohyeon sketched before going to sleep. 2 rooms, a corridor, a trap for the cold, a storage room, all with measurements. The captain shifts his gaze to the prince, and then Dohyeon tells him to close the entrance because the heat is escaping, to take off his wet coat, and to treat his left cheek now, otherwise necrosis will set in a day. Yoon Sung-ho stands motionless for 5 seconds. Then he silently takes off his coat and sits down. For 20 years, he had led people into these snows to die. He saw generals weeping on their knees and mothers clutching their dead children to their chests. He had never seen a condemned boy calmly treat frostbite on his own face a day later. Dohyeon melts a handful of snow by the lamp. He soaks a rag in warm water and presses it against the cheek. The captain flinches, not from pain, from something. Dohyeon doesn't remove his hand. He explains in an even voice that you can't rub with snow. It tears the damaged capillaries. There's movement behind the captain. 2 soldiers peer through the opening and see their commander sitting in the condemned man's shelter while the man treats his face. One swears quietly. Dohyeon orders them to come in and block the entrance. It's 37 below outside, and the wind has picked up. He has heat and light. That will be enough to keep him warm for 2 hours. The soldiers look at the captain. The captain nods. It's getting cramped in the tent. 4 men and a boy. The lamp burns steadily. It smells of melted fat. One soldier asks how the prince built this. Dohyeon answers simply. Snow is a good insulator, and with proper construction, heat loss is minimal. It's not magic, but a property of the material. The soldier looks at him as if he were speaking the language of spirits. The captain is silent and looks at the blueprint. At the numbers he doesn't understand. At a diagram that promises to turn a snowy wasteland into a dwelling. Then he asks quietly why the prince is drawing up a plan for 2 if he is here alone. Dohyeon looks him in the eye and says the plan is for 4. A hunting party is needed. A scout is needed. We need someone who knows the terrain. The captain has 20 years of experience on the northern border, and that knowledge is worth more than any fire artifact. Yoon Sung-ho is silent for a long time. All that can be heard is the crackling of the wick and the sound of people breathing. Then he stands up. He goes out. He returns 10 minutes later with a bundle. Dried meat, an axe, a coil of rope, a spare flint, 3 pairs of gloves. He says it's for the dead man, and the dead man won't need it. Dohyeon takes the bundle and nods. He doesn't thank him. Gratitude would sound like weakness right now. Instead, he divides the meat into 5 equal portions. He takes the smallest one for himself. He chews slowly. The prince's stomach isn't used to coarse food. When the meat runs out, Dohyeon asks about the surroundings. Is there a valley sheltered from the wind with water within a day's journey? Yoon Sung-ho stares at him for a long moment. Then he speaks. There's a valley beyond the northern ridge, half a day's journey, rock walls on 3 sides, a river frozen over but still flowing, peat, shrubbery, caves. He knows because he used to lead people there, people who were banished far from prying eyes. Dohyeon draws with charcoal on the wall. Not a map, a diagram, shelters, the route, fuel collection points. The system runs at full capacity, grinding every word into data. By the time the captain finishes, Dohyeon already knows what to do tomorrow. Yoon Sun-ho is about to leave. He looks at the drawing, at the prince. He says he'll be back in 3 days. Tomorrow, he must execute 3 exiles. 2 soldiers and a blacksmith. An order from the capital. But in the capital, they don't count the dead in the White Wasteland. If these 3 die tomorrow, on paper, in 3 days, they could still be standing alive in this valley. Dohyeon nods. 1 word. Okay. The captain leaves. The soldiers follow him. The lamp burns out. Dohyeon lies down and closes his eyes. His body aches. Behind his eyes, a dull, crushing pain. The system isn't free. Every calculation takes a toll on the brain. Today he pushed it for 8 hours straight. Tomorrow there will be a nosebleed and a migraine that will keep him in bed until noon. But tomorrow there will be supplies, and an axe, and people in 3 days. He doesn't smile. It's too early. But the needle smells of grease and human warmth. And beyond the walls, the white doom howls. And for the first time in 300 years, someone inside it isn't dying, but building. The morning began with blood. Dohyeon opened his eyes and felt a warm trickle crawl from his left nostril down his lip to his chin. He didn't move. He lay on his back in the needle and waited for his brain to stop throbbing with pain with every heartbeat. The system had warned him. Every large-scale use comes at a price. Yesterday, he had loaded it for 8 hours of continuous operation. Today, his body was paying the price. The migraine pressed on his eyes so hard that even the dim light of the lamp seemed blinding. He shut his eyes tight. He lay there for another 10 minutes. Then he forced himself to sit up. Blood dripped onto his fur coat. He pinched his nose with a scrap of his shirt and waited. 5 minutes later, the bleeding stopped. The pain remained, but became bearable. Not workable. Bearable. That meant he'd spend the first half of the day working at half strength and without the system. With his hands, his head, his memory, which remembered enough even without a digital interface. He crawled out of the igloo. It was quiet outside. The wind had died down overnight, and the white wasteland lay motionless and gray beneath the low sky. He didn't have a thermometer, but his body told him. 25 below, maybe 28. Without the wind, it was bearable. The first thing he did was survey the surroundings in the light of day. The plateau turned out to be wider than he'd thought yesterday. A rocky outcrop stretched 100 meters to the north, Beyond it began a gentle slope leading down to something resembling a frozen riverbed. Bushes, low, thorny, clinging to the rocks. Dry. Flammable. It was fuel. Not much, but enough for 3 or 4 days. He returned to the igloo and set to work. The axe the captain had left behind was crude, a heavy blade on a short handle. It wasn't suitable for delicate work, but it was fine for chopping brush and cutting through snow blocks. In 2 hours, he had chopped an armful of dry branches and stacked them inside the entrance tunnel. Not near the lamp. Brush burns quickly and hotly, but smokes. In an enclosed space, smoke is dangerous. The branches will be used for other things, for the frame, for tools, for handles for what he planned to do next. Then he turned his attention to the water. Snow is water, but you have to melt it the right way. If you simply heat the snow in a container, it will first compact, lose volume, and yield very little liquid for the large amount of fuel consumed. The right way is to layer it. A small amount of snow in a heated stone. Wait until it melts. Add more. That way, heat loss is minimal. He hollowed out a second stone to serve as a container. He placed it next to the lamp. In an hour, he had enough water to drink and leave a reserve. He forced himself to drink. His body didn't want to. In the cold, thirst dulls, and people die of dehydration without realizing what's happening. This is one of the most common mistakes in polar conditions. He knew this by heart. For lunch, he ate a quarter of the remaining meat. He chewed slowly. He sips of melted water. By midday, the migraine had subsided enough that he risked cautiously turning on the system. Not at full power. Partially. One query. He looked at the slope to the west and requested an analysis. The system responded weakly. Like a computer running on battery power with only a few % left. But the data came through. The slope. A 12-degree incline. Snow cover up to 1.5 meters. Frozen ground beneath it. But right here, a dark strip at the base. It's peat. Frozen, but it's peat. A sedimentary rock made of organic matter. It burns slowly and for a long time. It gives off steady heat. On Arctic expeditions on land, peat saved people when there was no other fuel. If he manages to get enough peat, the lamp will become not a luxury, but a constant source of heat. He turned off the system. The pain immediately shot in his temples, but not as badly as in the morning. So his brain is recovering. He needs a day of complete rest to return to full capacity. He didn't have a day. But he can work with his hands even without the system. He grabbed an axe and headed for the peat bog. Digging frozen soil with just an axe is the kind of work that makes your hands go numb and your back ache after half an hour. He worked for 2 hours. He chopped off pieces of peat the size of 2 fists. He hauled them back to the igloo. He stacked them by the entrance. He placed the first piece in the stone lamp next to the fat. The peat didn't catch fire right away. The fat helped. When the peat began to smolder with an even red glow, Dohyeon realized he had just extended his life by a week. He spent the rest of the day exploring. He walked around the perimeter of the plateau. To the south were cliffs. To the west was a slope covered in peat. To the north, a descent to a frozen riverbed, and beyond it, a ridge. The very valley Yoon Song-ho had spoken of lay beyond that ridge. A half-day's journey. He had to reach it before the captain and his men arrived, to survey the site, to determine if it was possible to build there. That evening he sat in the igloo and thought, not about the past. The past was far away and belonged to a dead man at the bottom of an icy lake in Taimyr. He thought about the future. The prince's borrowed memory contained fragments of knowledge about the world. The 9 kingdoms of Bekhan, an emperor on his deathbed, the struggle for the throne, fiery artifacts that are fading, the prophecy of ice. And he was in the middle of it all, an exiled prince whom everyone believed to be dead. A picture slowly took shape in his mind. White Doom was considered a cursed land. People were exiled here and forgotten. No one tried to live here because everyone believed it was impossible. But Alex Chen had spent 12 years working in places where living was also considered impossible. And people lived there. Arctic stations, polar bases, research camps on permafrost. It was all a matter of technology and knowledge. There was no electricity here. There were no modern materials. But there were basic principles: thermal insulation, ventilation, heat storage, food preservation, water management. All of this worked the same way in any century. Materials changed, the principles remained. And he knew these principles better than anyone else in the world. Before going to sleep, he took a piece of charcoal and began to sketch on the wall. Not a diagram of a shelter, a diagram of a settlement. For 10 people, then for 30, then for 100. Each stage was laid out logically: housing, heating, water, food, storage, workshop, wall. He drew until the charcoal crumbled in his fingers. Then he lay down and closed his eyes. His head hardly ached at all. Tomorrow he would reach the valley. The journey took 7 hours. Yoon Sung-ho had spoken of half a day, but he was talking about a healthy soldier in full gear. The prince's body was weak, and Dohyeon walked slowly, conserving his strength. Every hour he stopped for 10 minutes. He ate a piece of meat the size of a finger. He drank melted snow water from a flask he'd made from a piece of bark tied with a rope. The ridge turned out to be low, about 200 meters high. But climbing through deep snow without snowshoes is torture. He sank knee-deep with every step. He reached the summit with sweat and gasping for breath. And he froze. The valley opened up before him like a palm held out for a gift. Rock walls in a semicircle, tall, steep. Shelter from the wind on 3 sides. The bottom was flat and covered in snow. But the system, which had kicked in for a split second, showed him the main thing. Under the snow was earth, not rock, earth. There was soil here, which meant that once upon a time there was life here. And at the far edge, near the rock wall, black voids were visible. Caves. Yoon Sung-ho hadn't lied. He descended into the valley at sunset. He spent the night in one of the caves. Small, dry. The ceiling was low but even. The system, last of its strength, provided an analysis of the walls. The stone was dense, quartzite with flecks of something dark. Good thermal capacity. If he built a fire inside, the stone would give off heat for hours after the flames died down. He built a fire from the brush he'd brought. Small, economical, sufficient. And he drew again, this time on the cave wall. A master plan for the settlement he named Solgyeon, Snowlight. On the morning of the 3rd day, he began clearing a site for the first permanent structure. Not an igloo. An igloo is a temporary solution. For permanent housing, A structure made of stone and packed snow is needed, with double walls and an air gap between them. The thermos principle. 2 walls and a layer that doesn't conduct heat. Stone for the inner wall, packed snow for the outer one. A 10-centimeter gap filled with dry grass or moss if available. A roof of stone slabs covered by a snow dome. He worked all day, alone, with hands that bled and wouldn't obey him. He hauled stones from the rock face to the chosen spot. He hewed blocks from the snowdrifts. He stacked, fitted, and leveled them. By evening, he had a single wall waist high, 3 meters long, crooked, imperfect, but standing. He looked at it and felt a lump rise in his throat. Not from despair, from the fact that it was the first wall of the first house in a place where, for 300 years, no one had built anything but gallows. On the 4th day, Yoon S. Ho. He wasn't alone. He was accompanied by 3 others, 2 men and 1 woman, all in tattered clothes, with blue faces and the empty eyes of people who had already said goodbye to life. Yoon Sung Ho introduced them briefly. The first, Nam Gi Ho, a former sergeant in the Imperial Infantry, sentenced for disobeying an order. The order was to shoot the peasants who had delayed from submitting their taxes. He refused. He is 41 years old, hands like shovels and the gaze of a man who has seen too much. The second, Park Ji-won, a former military doctor, sentenced for treating wounded rebels. He is 53 years old, thin, coughs. His fingers are long and precise. His eyes are intelligent and weary. Third, Kang Soo-hyun, a former servant in the inner court, sentenced for stealing food from the palace kitchen. She is 32, short and wiry, with hands accustomed to hard labor. Her eyes are wary, like those of a beast ready to strike. All 3 were supposed to have died yesterday. In his report, Yoon Sung Ho wrote that the execution had been carried out. The bodies were left on the plateau. Standard procedure. No one will check. They stood at the cave entrance and watched Dohyeon, a boy, skinny, in torn silk under a shabby fur coat, with his hands wrapped in rags soaked in blood, with burning eyes on an emaciated face. And behind him stood a wall, a stone wall, not very tall, crooked, but a wall. Here, in white doom. Nam Gi Ho looked at the wall. He looked at the prince. He asked what to do. Dohyeon pointed to a pile of stones by the cliff and explained that they needed a second wall parallel to the first, 10 centimeters away. He gestured with his hands to show what size stones to choose and how to stack them. Nam Gi Ho nodded. He took off his tattered cloak and began hauling stones. Park Ji-won first examined Dohyeon's hands. He said nothing. Silently, he unwrapped the rags. He washed the wounds with melted snow. He applied a bandage made of clean cloth that Yoon Sung Ho had brought in his bundle. Then he looked at the prince and said that if he continued to work with his hands, an infection would set in 2 days, and he would lose his fingers. Dohyeon nodded and said he understood. He said that from now on, he would give orders instead of doing the heavy lifting. Kang Soo-hyun surveyed the cave without saying a word. She found a spot for a hearth. She arranged the stones in a circle. She started a fire using the brushwood she had brought. An hour later, the cave smelled of heat and meat sizzled on a flat stone. She took a bundle from her bosom. Salt, a handful of flour, dried roots. She had carried them on her the whole way. Dohyeon looked at her. She looked back. He told her she would be in charge of provisions and the kitchen, that it was the most important position because an army of hungry people is worth nothing, but a well-fed person can move mountains. Soo-hyun at him for 5 seconds. Then she turned away toward the fire, but her back straightened by half a centimeter. In the evening, the 5 of them sat around the fire in the cave. They ate meat with salt. They drank hot water. They were silent. Yoon Sung-ho was the first to break the silence. He said that in a week he would bring 2 more. He said there were convicts whom no one would remember, people the system had cast aside. Do-hyun nodded. Then he spoke, not loudly, calmly. He told them the plan. Not the whole plan, just the part they could understand and accept right now. They would build a house, a real one, a warm one, with a stove that would burn for days on peat, with a month's worth of supplies, with a roof that wouldn't collapse under a snowfall. Then a second house. Then a third. It was possible to live here in this valley. He knew how. Nam Gi-ho asked why. Why build in a cursed place? Do-hyun answered. He said it was because no one would look for them here, because they were dead on paper, because the dead are free, and because he wasn't going to stay dead forever. Silence. The fire crackled. Park Ji-won coughed quietly. Then he said that if the prince was going to keep working in the cold, he'd need gloves, and that he knew how to make hand ointment if they could find some pine resin. Kang Soo-hyun said they needed to start drying meat for storage tomorrow, and that for that they'd need a frame, ropes, and Nam Ji-ho said that the stones the prince had chosen for the wall were too small. We need bigger ones. He'll find some tomorrow. Yoon Sung-ho was silent. Then he stood up and went out into the night. Do-hyun found him 10 minutes later. The captain was standing at the edge of the valley, staring into the darkness. His face was wet. Not from the snow. He didn't say anything. Do-hyun didn't ask anything. He just stood beside him. 2 men stood at the edge of the cursed edge and were silent. And down below in the cave a fire was burning, and 3 men who had been dead that morning were discussing the best way to dry meat. During their first week in the valley, they built a house. Not a shack, not a burrow, a house. Nam Gi-ho hauled stones with such fury as if every cobblestone were a personal insult. His hands knew no fatigue or refused to acknowledge it. The walls grew half a meter a day. Do-hyun stood nearby and guided them. He didn't give orders. He explained. Every stone must be laid with an inward slope. Every joint is smeared with wet snow that freezes and becomes cement. There is a gap between the inner and outer walls. Into the gap went dry moss that Soo-hyun had found under the overhang of a rock. Moss is air. Air does not conduct heat. A wall made of 2 walls with air between them holds heat like palms clasped around a hot cup. Nam Gi-ho frowned at first. He had built barracks in the Imperial Army and was used to something different. A single wall. Thick. Massive. Do-hyun explained the difference to him. A thick stone wall freezes through in the cold and sucks the heat out of the room. It works like a radiator in reverse. But a double wall with a gap works like a barrier. Heat cannot pass through still air. Nam Gi-ho listened. He thought about it. Then he said that if the prince was right, then all the barracks of the Northern Army were built incorrectly. Do-hyun replied that yes, they were. Every single one. Nam Gi-ho cursed and continued working, but now with a different expression on his face. The expression of a man who had begun to understand something. The roof was made of stone slabs, thin ones, flat ones. Soo-hyun had found them on a scree slope by the eastern wall of the valley. She found everything, really. She had a knack for things. Need a flat container for cooking? She'd find a stone with a natural indentation. Need a rope? She'd weave it from shrub bark, peeling it off in thin strips and twisting them together. A hook was needed. She bent a branch by heating it over the fire. In the palace, she had survived on scraps for 12 years and found a way out of the impossible. Here, that skill was worth its weight in gold. The slabs were laid overlapping. The joints were filled with snow. More snow was piled on top. The result was a roof that also served as additional insulation. The thicker the layer of snow, the warmer it was inside. Snow is not the enemy. Snow is a material. You just have to know how to use it. The stove. That was the main thing. Dohyeon spent 2 days on the calculations. The system operated in shifts. 1 hour of work, 2 hours of rest. Otherwise, migraines and nosebleeds. He alternated engineering analysis with physical labor. While his brain rested, his hands hauled stones. While his hands rested, his brain calculated. The furnace was supposed to solve the main problem of the White Peril. Fire in these parts devoured fuel and gave off heat only while it burned. Once the fire went out, within an hour the house turned into an icy coffin. Dohyeon's furnace worked differently. A massive stone structure with a long chimney running along the wall. The fire burns in the firebox. The hot smoke does not rise immediately, but travels through a long horizontal channel. The stones of the channel heat up. When the fire goes out, the stones continue to give off heat for 8, 10, or 12 hours. The principle of the Russian stove. The principle of the Korean ondol. A principle known to every people who lived in the cold, but which, for some reason, was unknown here. The system explained why. Bacon had lived with fiery artifacts for 500 years. The legacy of the fallen empire of flame. Why learn to build efficient stoves when there is a magical stone that heats forever? And now, the artifacts were fading, and people found themselves defenseless against the cold because they had forgotten how to live with it. Dohyeon built the stove for 4 days. With the help of Namgiho, who handed him stones and held the slabs. With the help of Park Ji-won, who mixed clay from the frozen soil softened by meltwater. With the help of Soo-hyun, who found a clay deposit near the riverbed under the ice. The clay was poor quality, full of sand and pebbles, but it was suitable for the mortar between the stones. When the furnace was ready, Dohyeon lit the first fire in it. Peat, dry brush for kindling. The smoke traveled through the channel along the wall and exited through the chimney in the roof. The draft was working. An hour later, the stones of the channel were warm to the touch. 2 hours later, they were hot. Namgiho pressed his palm against the wall and held it there. Then he took it away. He looked at Dohyeon. He said nothing, but there was something new in his eyes. Not just surprise, understanding. He realized that this boy knew things that no one else knew. By the end of the second week, Yoon Sung-ho had brought more people. 5 of them, 3 men and 2 women. All exiles. All dead on paper. Among them was a man whom Dohyeon had been waiting for, though he didn't know what he was waiting for. Baek Tae-ho, a blacksmith, a former armorer from the southern province, sentenced for debts that were actually fake. A local official wanted his smithy. Tae-ho refused. The official found a way. The blacksmith was 46, huge, hands like sledgehammers. His face was scarred on one side, an old burn from the smelter. He entered the valley, and the first thing he saw was a house. Stone, with a roof, with smoke coming from the chimney, in white doom. He stopped and stood there so long that Yoon Sung-ho nudged him in the back. Dohyeon met him at the entrance, looked at his hands, at the calluses, at the burns, at the shape of fingers accustomed to hammers and tongs. And the first thing he said to him was to ask if a blacksmith could work without a forge. Taeho replied that a forge could be built out of stone if there was clay and someone supplied air with bellows. Dohyeon nodded and said there was clay, and they would make the bellows out of hide. Taeho looked at him, at the boy, a prince who spoke of blacksmithing as if he knew it inside out. He asked how he knew about bellows. Dohyeon replied that he knew how air moves and that oxygen is needed for combustion, and that bellows are simply a pump for oxygen. He said that the melting point of iron is 1,538 degrees, and that for forging, 900. He said that a peat fire with forced draft could reach 1,100 if the chamber was set up correctly. Taeho was silent for half a minute. Then he said one word. "Show me." They built the bellows together. Dohyeon gave the measurements and explained the principles. Taeho carried them out because his hands knew stone and fire better than anyone. The combustion chamber was made of dense quartzite. The walls were thick to accumulate heat. The air duct was a tube rolled from bark and smeared with clay. A temporary solution. They would replace it with a stone one later. The bellows were made from a piece of hide that Yoon Sung-ho had obtained from who knows where. Soo-hyun sewed them together from scraps of the seams, roughly, but they pumped air. The first smelting took place on the third day. Not iron. They didn't have any iron ore yet. But Dohyeon found something else. A brown deposit was discovered at the bottom of the frozen riverbed. The system identified it as limonite, bog ore, low in iron content, 30 or maybe 35%. In the normal world, no one would bother with it. Here, it was a treasure. Taeho looked at the brown lumps and shook his head. He said it was mud, not ore. Dohyeon explained the process. High-temperature roasting, reduction with carbon. Carbon is found in peat. If you mix ground limonite with peat coal and heat it to 1,000 degrees, the iron will be reduced from its oxide. Dirty, brittle, but iron. And then forging, heating, striking, folding, heating again, striking again. Each fold removes slag and compacts the metal. 20 folds, and from the swamp, perfectly serviceable steel is produced. Taeho listened. His face changed as he understood. This boy didn't just know the theory. He knew metal, knew its nature, knew why it breaks in the cold. This was the Achilles heel of every Baekhan blacksmith. Swords and axes would shatter in the cold like glass. The finest blades from southern masters would crack at -30. Everyone considered it a curse of the north. Dohyeon explained. It's called cold brittleness. At low temperatures, ordinary steel loses its impact toughness. The molecular structure becomes rigid. A crack that would stop in the warmth races through the entire blade in a fraction of a second in the cold. The solution? A different composition. More carbon. Slow cooling. Tempering at a specific temperature. Technically, this requires temperature control, which they don't have. But Dohyeon knows workarounds. Oil cooling in animal fat instead of water. Multiple reforging. Monitoring the color of the tempering lines on the metal. Blue means 280 degrees. Yellow, 220. Brown, 260. Each color corresponds to a specific temperature and specific properties of the steel. Taeho listened with his mouth agape. Then he closed his mouth. Then he said that in 25 years at the forge, he'd never heard anything like it. Then he asked when to start. Dohyeon said tomorrow. The first knife was ready a week later. Rough, short. The blade was uneven, but it didn't break. Tae-ho tested it at -30 degrees. He struck a rock, a bone, a frozen tree. The knife bent and sprang back. It didn't crack. Tae-ho held it in his hands and looked at Dohyeon the way you look at a man who has just turned everything you knew about your craft upside down. He said nothing. He bowed, deeply, the way one bows to a teacher. By the end of the first month, 10 people were living in Seoljeon. One house for all of them. A stove that never went out, a forge, a workshop, a 2-week supply of peat and meat. So-hyun organized the storage system. Every item in its place. Meat hung to dry on ropes above the chimney. The water in the stone containers by the stove was always warm. Salt, worth its weight in gold, was distributed by her personally, and woe to anyone who took more than their share. She had transformed from a silent, frightened woman into a homemaker, little tyrant of the kitchen and pantry, and everyone obeyed her because she was right. Park Ji-won treated everyone. Dohyeon's hands healed thanks to an ointment made of pine resin and fat that he prepared on the second day. He treated Nam Gi-ho's cold with a decoction of bark and a hot sleep by the stove. He found several plants in the valley that could be used as medicine. The system confirmed his assumptions. Rosehip berries under the snow on the southern slope, vitamin C, the best remedy for scurvy. He ordered them to gather every single one. And then an avalanche struck. The third day of the fourth week. It had been snowing non-stop for 2 days. Heavy, wet snow that settled on the slopes like a blanket. The system activated on its own. A warning. A red flicker in the corner of his eye. The eastern slope's incline was 34 degrees. Snow load critical. Probability of an avalanche in the next 12 hours is over 80%. The path of the avalanche is straight toward the house. Dohyeon woke everyone up in the middle of the night. 10 people. Sleepy, angry, confused. He explained briefly. Avalanche. 4 hours or less. We need to head for the rock face. Nam Gi-ho asked how he knew. Dohyeon pointed to the slope and explained. The slope angle. The thickness of fresh snow on the old snowpack. The temperature that had risen during the day and weakened the bond between the layers. The wind that had loaded the leeward side with additional mass. Each factor on its own is not dangerous. Altogether, it's a recipe for disaster. They left. They took their supplies, tools, everything they could carry. They huddled against the rock face on the opposite side of the valley and waited. The avalanche came at dawn, quietly, without a roar, just a wall of white moving downward, and in 30 seconds it covered the spot where the house had stood. A mass of snow 2 meters thick. If they had stayed inside, they would have been crushed or buried, and they would have suffocated within 20 minutes. 10 people stood by the wall and looked at what was left of their home. Silence. Kang Soo-hyun pressed her hands to her face. Park Ji-won sat down on a rock and closed his eyes. Nam Gi-ho stood motionless. His fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. A month's work. Under the snow. Everything under the snow. Dohyeon stood and watched. Then he turned to them. He said they would rebuild the house. He said that now he knew where to build so the avalanche wouldn't reach it. Over there, by the west wall. The angle of the natural slope protects the site. The snow will slide past. He said that this time they would build it better, because the first time he hadn't taken 3 things into account that he would now. He said they would dig out the stove because the avalanche couldn't break the stones. And he said that no one had been hurt. Everyone was alive. and the stones and snow hadn't gone anywhere. Nam-gi-ho looked at him. He looked at the buried valley. He looked at the boy standing in the cold in his tattered fur coat, talking about the new house as calmly as if he were discussing rearranged furniture. And he did something he hadn't done in 30 years. He laughed. Briefly. Hoarsely. Angrily. But it was laughter. And a second later, Soo-hyun laughed alongside him. And Tae-ho. And even Park Ji-won, coughing through his laughter. They began digging that very hour. The second house was built in 10 days. Faster, because now there were 10 pairs of hands and the experience of the first construction. The spot by the western wall turned out to be better than the previous one. The rock jutted out like a canopy, creating a natural roof over part of the site. Less snow from above. Less work. Dohyeon used the overhang as a foundation and built 3 walls against the rock, turning the natural shelter into a full-fledged room. Larger than before, with 2 rooms, 1 shared, 1 for the workshop and storage. They moved the stove. They dug the stones out from under the avalanche, just as Dohyeon had promised. Not a single one was cracked. They reassembled it. They routed the chimney through a gap in the overhang. The draft was even better because the height difference between the firebox and the outlet had increased. When the stove started working and warm air filled the new house, Dohyeon sat down against the wall and couldn't get up for 3 hours. His body was silent. It refused to move. Park Ji-won covered him with a blanket and wouldn't let anyone disturb him. He said that the prince worked for 2 people, but ate for half, and that if this continued, he wouldn't be around in a month. Dohyeon heard this through a month and knew the doctor was right. The prince's body wasn't built for this kind of life. 19 years of palace existence. No muscles, no stamina, no tolerance for the cold. Everything he did through sheer stubbornness and knowledge. Knowledge doesn't replace physical strength. It provides direction, but you still have to carry the stones by hand. He solved this problem by the 2nd month. Not alone. With the help of Nam-gi-ho. The former sergeant knew how to train soldiers. Every morning before breakfast, an hour of physical training. Running through the snow, squats, push-ups against a rock, heavy lifting. For the first 3 days, Dohyeon couldn't finish a single exercise. He fell. He gasped for air. He felt sick. Nam-gi-ho stood nearby and waited. He didn't rush him. He didn't mock him. He just waited. On the 4th day, Dohyeon finished half. By the 10th day, 2/3. By the end of the month, he was doing a full set, and even though his legs were shaking and his vision was blurring, he did it. His body was changing. Slowly, painfully, but it was changing. Muscles were appearing where there had been none. His breathing grew deeper. His arms grew stronger. He was still a skinny boy next to the burly Nam-gi-ho or the massive Tae-ho, but he no longer collapsed from exhaustion after 3 hours of work. In the 6th week, new people arrived. Yoon Sung-ho brought 7. This time, not just convicts. 3 were refugees from the northern border, to villagers from a village that had been burned down by bandits. A man, a woman, a child of about 8, a boy, silent, with frostbitten ears. When Dohyeon saw the child, something changed. Not in the plan, in him. Before that, he had been building to survive, for himself and for the people who were soldiers and workers and could take care of themselves. The child couldn't. The child just stood there and looked with huge eyes at the unfamiliar boy, a prince, and his frostbitten ears were purple, and he wasn't crying because he'd forgotten how. Dohyeon knelt down in front of him. He examined the ears. 2nd-degree frostbite, almost 3rd degree on the right. Park Ji-won was already standing nearby. They treated the ears together. Ointment, a warm bandage. The boy didn't make a sound. Dohyeon took off the scarf that Soo-hyun had knitted for him from threads of unraveled fabric and wrapped it around the boy's head. Then he took him by the hand and led him into the house. To the stove. To food. To warmth. The boy's mother followed behind, crying silently. His father carried a bundle containing the remnants of their lives and stared at the ground. That evening, Dohyeon announced that they needed a bath. Not because of the dirt, although the dirt was part of it. Because hot water heals. It heals the skin. It heals the muscles. It heals something inside that you can't touch. People who haven't washed or warmed themselves properly for months carry this inside them. The cold creeps not only under the skin, it creeps into the soul, and you can only drive it out with heat. He built the bathhouse based on the principle of a Finnish sauna. A small stone room, completely airtight except for a ventilation hole. Inside was a stone stove, red-hot stones onto which water was splashed. Steam, heat, 100 degrees near the ceiling. The system provided the calculations. The room's volume, the mass of the stones, the amount of firewood needed for heating, the heating time, and ventilation to prevent suffocation. Everything added up. He built the bathhouse in 5 days with the help of Tae-ho and Nam-gi-ho. Tae-ho forged an iron door hinge, the first item from the forge that wasn't a weapon or a tool. The door was made of stone slabs tied together with rope and smeared with clay. Rough, but it held. The first day of the bathhouse was a big event. Dohyeon stoked the stove for 6 hours. The stones glowed red hot. He went in first to check. Steam hit his face, and for 3 seconds he couldn't breathe. Then he got used to it. The heat embraced his body like a living creature. Every muscle relaxed. Every joint stopped aching. He came out 10 minutes later, flushed and steamy, and for the first time in 2 months, he felt his body not as a tool, but as a part of himself. Then the others went in. 2 at a time, in threes. Nam-gi-ho went in silently and came out 15 minutes later with a look on his face as if he had seen God. He stood in the cold, surrounded by clouds of steam from his own body, and said nothing. Then he said that in 30 years of army service, he had never once felt so alive. Soo-hyun went in last, alone, for a long time. When she came out, her eyes were red, not from the steam. She didn't say a word. But the next morning, for the first time, she began to sing while cooking, quietly, to herself, a song no one knew. The mother of the boy with frostbitten ears washed her son in the bathhouse for 40 minutes. Water, warmth, cleanliness, things she thought were lost forever. When she carried him out, wrapped in a dry hide, the boy was asleep, for the first time in weeks, calm, without trembling. The bathhouse changed everything. Not physically, although physically too. It changed something in the relationships between people. Before the bathhouse, they were a group of survivors. After the bathhouse, they became something else. Something closer to a family. Shared warmth. Shared nakedness. Shared vulnerability. Dohyeon hadn't planned this effect, but he noticed it right away. People started talking to each other not just about work. They started sharing food not according to Soo-hyun's rationing, but just because. They started laughing. Quietly. Cautiously. like people who aren't sure if they're allowed to, but laughing. By the end of the second month, Seolgyong was home to 22 people. 3 houses, a bathhouse, a smithy, a storeroom, a meat smokehouse that Soo-hyun had demanded and received. Yoon Sung-ho came every week. He brought people. He brought supplies. Every time, he stayed the night. Every time, he left in the morning with the face of a man being pulled in 2 directions. The service kept him at the border. Something else was pulling him toward the valley. Dohyeon saw it and didn't press him. The captain's time had not yet come. But it would. One day, Yoon Sung-ho brought news. A request had come from the capital regarding the exiles. Someone had started counting the dead. So far, it was just routine record-keeping. But if the numbers didn't add up, someone would start asking questions. Dohyeon listened and nodded. He said he'd expected this sooner. He asked how much time they had. Yoon Sung-ho said a month, maybe 2. Winter slows down correspondence, and couriers get stuck in the snow. But by spring, the requests will reach the northern office, and then the inspection will arrive. A month, maybe 2. Dohyeon looked out at the valley, at the houses with smoke rising from them, at the people moving between the buildings, at the boy with bandaged ears who had come out onto the street for the first time and was throwing snowballs at the wall. He turned to Nam-gi-ho and Tae-ho. He said they needed a wall, not a house wall, a defensive wall, to block the entrance to the valley, the only 20-meter-wide passage between the cliffs. A 3-meter-high stone wall, 1 meter thick, with a gate, with a lookout platform. Nam-gi-ho asked how long it would take. Dohyeon said 3 weeks. Nam-gi-ho looked at him as if he were crazy. 22 people, 5 of them children and elderly. A 3-meter wall in 3 weeks. Dohyeon explained. Not an entirely stone wall. A stone foundation 1 meter high. Above that, blocks of compacted snow saturated with water. In the cold, the wet snow freezes into a monolith as strong as concrete. It's called pack ice, a mixture of ice and filler. On land, pykrete was used in World War II when the British wanted to build an aircraft carrier out of ice. Ice mixed with wood shavings is several times stronger than ordinary ice and melts much more slowly. Here, peat crumbs will work instead of wood shavings. The system provided a strength calculation. A wall made of pykrete on a stone foundation will stand for years in constant frost. And if you pour water over it, it will be covered with an icy crust that is impossible to climb. Nam-gi-ho listened. Then he asked how the prince knew about the war and aircraft carriers. Dohyeon realized he had said too much. He replied that he had read about it in an old treatise. Nam-gi-ho gave him a long look, but didn't ask any further questions. Work began the next day. Everyone was building the wall. Even the children carried snow in baskets that Soo-hyun had woven. Nam-gi-ho was in charge of the stone foundation. Tae-ho was chiseling the blocks. Dohyeon stood to the side and directed the work. The system was running in low power mode. Short bursts to calculate loads and angles. The rest of the time, he did the calculations in his head without the interface. Slower, but without a migraine. By the end of the second week, the wall was half finished. The stone foundation closed off the passageway. Icy blocks rose above it, row after row. Dohyeon ordered the wall to be built not straight, but with a slight inward slope, 3 degrees. From the attacker's perspective, the wall looks sheer, but the slope makes it more resistant to a battering ram, and prevents a ladder from being placed flush against it. A small detail, but small details decide the battle. Tae-ho built the gate. There were no wooden planks. He welded a frame from iron strips forged in a furnace and clad it with stone slabs. Heavy, bulky, but impenetrable to anything except a battering ram. And in front of the gate, Dohyeon ordered a shallow moat to be dug and filled with water. In the frost, the water turned into an ice rink. Any unit approaching the gates would lose formation on the ice. Yoon Sung-ho arrived when the wall was nearly finished. He stood at the entrance to the valley and watched. A 3-meter barrier blocked the passage from rock to rock. It glistened with a crust of ice. A sentry was patrolling the top. It was Nam Gi-ho in a fur coat with an axe slung over his shoulder. Beyond the wall, the roofs of houses and the smoke from stoves were visible. Yoon Sung-ho stood there for a long time. Then he entered through the gate. Dohyeon met him inside. The captain looked at him. He looked at the wall. He looked at the people who were working, moving about, and living. He said that an inspection party from the office would leave in a month. 3 officials and 10 soldiers. They would check the records of executions. If they reached the valley, it would all be over. Dohyeon nodded. He asked about the inspection route. Yoon Sung-ho explained. They're taking the northern route, through the Hamgyong Pass, past the Wolf's Maw outpost, then across the plateau. It's a 2-day journey from the outpost to the valley, Dohyeon thought. Not through the system, with his own mind. The Hamgyong Pass. He'd seen it from afar during reconnaissance. Narrow, high, buried in snow. The system had noted the slope's gradient and the snowpack's depth in passing back then. 38 degrees. Critical load. Same situation as with the avalanche in the valley. Only here, instead of waiting, we can trigger it. Cut into the base of the snowpack in the right spot. The vibration from the impact, or simply the weight of a single person at the right point. The avalanche will block the pass for weeks. An investigation will be launched. We'll buy some time. He told this to Yoon Sung-ho. The captain remained silent. Then he asked if people would die. Dohyeon replied that if done correctly, the avalanche would come down when the inspection team was a day's journey from the pass. No one would be hurt. Just the road would be closed. Yoon Sung-ho nodded. Then he said he would go himself. He knows the pass. He knows the route. He knew where to cut through the snow. Dohyeon agreed. The captain left at dawn. 4 days later, a distant rumble rolled through the mountains. Low and drawn out, like a giant's groan. An avalanche. The Hamgyong Pass was closed. Yoon Sung-ho returned a week later, covered in snow, frostbitten, with a dislocated shoulder, but alive. Pak Ji-won set his shoulder. Dohyeon personally rubbed ointment on his hands and made him sit by the stove for 2 days. The captain said the inspection party had turned back. A courier reported that the pass was impassable until spring. Spring was 4 months away. 4 months. Dohyeon stood on the wall's observation deck and looked north. Toward where, beyond the ridges, lay the endless white death. 4 months is enough to turn a village into a city. Enough to find allies among the northern tribes. Enough to prepare for the moment when the inspection finally arrives, and that it will be followed not by 3 officials, but by 300 soldiers. He went downstairs. He gathered everyone around the large stove. 22 people. Men, women, children. Everyone was looking at him. He spoke. He said they had bought time. He said there was little time left. He said he needed everyone. Every single one. Every day. He listed the tasks: expanding the living quarters, increasing supplies, scouting the surroundings, searching for resources, training the fighters. Nam-gi-ho would begin training those capable of handling weapons. Tae-ho would forge those weapons. Soo-hyun would organize supplies for 100 people, because by spring there would be 100 of them. Park Ji-won would prepare the infirmary. The people listened. They were silent. Then Nam-gi-ho stood up. Then Tae-ho. Then Soo-hyun. One by one, all 22 of them. They stood and looked at the young prince with burning eyes on his gaunt face. He didn't ask for their consent. He didn't beg. He simply stated what needed to be done. And they stood because in 2 months he had never once lied. Never once hid behind others' backs. Not once had he eaten more than the others. Not once had he gone to bed before the others. And every time someone was cold or sick or afraid, he was there. Not with words of comfort, with a solution, with a plan, with a stove, with hot water, with ointment for frostbitten hands. That was enough. The 3rd month began with a frost so bitter it cracked the stones. The thermometer read -47 at dawn. Even the long burning stoves were working at their limit. Dohyeon got up before dawn, went around all the houses, and checked every stove. In the 3rd month, which had been finished a week ago, the chimney was clogged with frost. The draft had dropped. Inside, it was no warmer than -10. A family of 4 was sleeping huddled together in animal skins. The child was coughing. Dohyeon cleared the chimney by hand. He scraped out the frost with a stick. He tossed in some peat. Half an hour later, the draft was restored and the temperature began to rise. He made a mental note. He needed removable chimney sections that could be taken apart and cleaned. His mind sketched out a design. A ceramic pipe made of fired clay. Modular. The sections fit into one another. Any one can be removed and cleaned. He gave the drawing to Tae-ho that evening. The blacksmith looked at it and said it wasn't blacksmithing work but pottery. Dohyeon replied that he knew. He said they needed a potter, or would have to learn how to do it themselves. There was clay in the valley. Firing in a kiln is possible. Tae-ho grunted and said he'd try. 3 days later, he brought the first pipe. Crooked, thick-walled, with a crack down the side. But it was pottery, fired clay. The first in Seoljun. Dohyeon examined the crack. The system gave a hint. Too rapid heating. Clay with high moisture content bursts from the inside due to steam when fired abruptly. The blanks must be dried for at least 2 days before firing, and the temperature must be raised gradually, 1 hour for every 100 degrees. Tae-ho listened and nodded. The second sample, 4 days later, was crack-free, rough but intact, functional. They replaced the chimneys in all the houses within a week. Not a single one got clogged again. In the 9th week, Dohyeon sent a reconnaissance party north. Nam-gi-ho and 2 young men from among the new settlers. Their task was to find traces of the northern tribes. Yun Sung-ho had spoken of the Silver Wolf tribe. Nomads. They live in the icy wasteland beyond the 2nd mountain range. Hunters. They know the White Death like the backs of their hands. Making contact with them could solve a lot of problems. Guides, hunters. Their knowledge of the land is unmatched. Nam-gi-ho left for 5 days. He returned on the 4th, not alone. A woman was with him, tall, in a white fur coat, a narrow, swarthy face with tattoos on her cheekbones. Fine lines like cracks in the ice. Light eyes, almost white. She walked as if the frost and wind were not enemies but companions. Nam-gi-ho brought her to Dohyeon. He said she had come out to them on her own on the second day of their journey. She appeared from the blizzard like a ghost. She said she had been waiting for Yuri, a shaman of the Silver Wolf tribe. She stood before Dohyeon and looked at him with her white eyes, for a long time, silently. Then she spoke. Her voice was low and soft, with an accent that made every word stretch like honey in the frost. She said the ice had told her about him. She said that 3 moons ago, the wind had carried the scent of a new fire from the dead valley. She said the spirits of winter did not understand him because he spoke to the cold in a language they do not know. And she said she had come to see the one who builds houses where only death is supposed to dwell. Dohyeon listened. The system analyzed, not the words. Words were a mysticism he didn't understand and had no intention of understanding. The system analyzed the person. Age. Yuri looked to be in her early 20s, but something in her movements, in the depth of her gaze, in the way she held her head, suggested she was older. 28, maybe 30, maybe older. Physical condition. Excellent. No signs of exhaustion or frostbite. She had lived here her whole life, and the cold was her home, not her enemy. He told her he was glad to meet her. He said he wanted to speak with her people. He said he wasn't asking for submission. He was asking for an exchange. He had what they didn't have: warm houses, stoves, tools, metal. They have what he lacks: knowledge of the land, hunting trails, an understanding of winter that comes only with generations. Yuri listened. Then she said that her people do not trust the Southerners. The Southerners had come before. They promised. They took things. They left. Or they didn't leave, and then it was worse. Dohyeon nodded. He said he wasn't a Southerner. He was a dead man, just like them in the eyes of the Empire. His name had been struck from the rolls. His rights had been taken away. He stood there, not out of choice, but because he had nowhere else to go, and the only thing he knows how to do is build. Yuri looked at him. Then she turned and walked to the wall. She placed her hand on the icy surface. She stood there for a minute. 2. Then she came back. She said that the wall speaks the truth, that the stones and ice within it lie there with care, not fear. She said that people who want to conquer don't build like this. People who want to stay build like this. She would stay for 3 days. She would look. She would listen. Then she would decide. For 3 days, Yuri walked around Soljo. She touched the walls of houses. She sat by the stoves. She watched the people. She talked with Soohyun about food, with Taeho about metal, with Park Jivan about medicine, with the children who, for some reason, were immediately drawn to her. A boy with frostbitten ears followed her like a shadow, and she let him. On the second evening, she was sitting by the stove in the big house, and Dohyeon sat down next to her. He didn't speak. He just sat there. She was silent too. Then, without warning, she said she knew. She said he wasn't who he seemed to be. Not a prince. Something else. Someone older. Someone from far away whom she couldn't name. She said she heard 2 voices inside him. One young, confused, adjusting. The other adult, precise, knowing. Dohyeon froze. His heart began to race. For the first time in 3 months in this world, someone had seen the truth. He could have denied it. He could have lied. Yuri waited. He answered quietly. He said she was right. He said he was from far away. Very far away. He said he hadn't come of his own free will, but had stayed of his own, and that both voices inside him wanted the same thing, for the people around him to be alive and warm. Yuri nodded. So simply, without questions, without suspicion, like someone who's used to the world being more complicated than it seems. She said she'd return with her people in a month, and that they'd come not as guests but as neighbors, if he built for them too. Dohyeon said he would. He asked what her people revered, what spirits, what symbols, what rules for the dwelling. Yuri looked at him with an expression he had never seen before. None of the Southerners had ever asked. They came and built as they were accustomed to, and were surprised when the northern tribes refused to live in their structures. She spoke for 2 hours, about the wind spirits that need a passage through the dwelling, about the wolf symbol that must be above the entrance, about how the hearth must not be in the center, but by the north wall, because the north is the home of the ancestors, about how windows are not made on the east side, because the east wind carries the voices of the dead. Dohyeon listened. He wrote it down with charcoal on a stone. The system processed each rule and translated it into engineering specifications. A passage for the wind spirits is ventilation. They can be combined. A hearth by the north wall means the chimney runs along the north side. No windows on the east side means the east wall is solid and can be thicker for additional insulation. Every belief was transformed into a structural solution that did not violate spiritual rules and simultaneously improved the house. Yuri watched his notes. Then she said quietly, she said that he wasn't building a fortress. He was building a house. Dohyeon stopped the coal. He looked at her. She looked calm, with something warm in her light eyes. He nodded. She left at dawn, alone, in a blizzard. She vanished into the white as silently as she had appeared. The 4th month, Soljeon, 30 residents, 3 houses, a bathhouse, a smithy, a wall, a smokehouse, and a new building that hadn't been there before, a greenhouse. The idea came to Dohyeon in the 3rd week as he watched Soo-hyun ration the last of the dried roots. Food in White Doom is meat and fat, nothing else. People lived on a protein-only diet, no vitamins, no fiber, no fresh greens. Scurvy was waiting around the corner. Rose hips helped, but supplies were limited. A source of fresh plants was needed. In winter. In the permafrost. Any local would say it was impossible. Alex Chen had worked in the Arctic and seen hydroponic systems at polar stations. Hydroponics is impossible here. No pumps, no electricity, no nutrient solutions. But there is another way. A greenhouse. Not glass. There is no glass. Ice. Ice lets light through. Not as good as glass, but enough for plants that don't need much. The design was simple in theory and monstrously complex to execute. A stone frame, a roof of ice slabs, thin, polished, transparent. Inside, a stone furnace with a long underground chimney. Hot smoke flows under the floor, heating the soil. The Ondol principle, the Korean underfloor heating system. If the soil is heated to +5 degrees and the air inside is kept around 0, some plants will grow. Slowly, but they will grow. What plants? The system ran through the options. Onions, the most undemanding. They grow with minimal light and at low temperatures. From bulbs that can be found, where to find them. Yoon Sung-ho. He brought supplies from the border. The supplies included bulbs, small, wrinkled, unsuitable for food, perfect for planting. Dohyeon asked the captain to bring some bulbs on his next visit. Any kind, the oldest and most useless ones. And seeds, if he could find any. Any seeds. Yoon Sung-ho looked at him strangely, but nodded. A week later, he brought a small bag, 23 bulbs. A handful of some seeds that the cook at the outpost had thrown away. Dohyeon treated it like a treasure. It took 10 days to build the greenhouse. The hardest part was the ice slabs for the roof. Tae-ho came up with a method. They poured a thin layer of water onto a flat stone. They let it freeze. Then they removed it. The result was an ice slab 2 fingers thick and the size of a human torso. Transparent, fragile. But if laid on a sturdy stone frame, it held. 20 slabs. 20 cycles of pouring and freezing. A stone frame with grooves for the slabs. The cracks were sealed with icy slush. A door made of hide on a wooden frame. Inside, an underground chimney from a small peat stove. When everything was ready, Dohyeon went inside. Light. Dim, bluish, diffused. But light. After months in stone houses lit only by lamps, it was like a blow. He stood under the icy roof and looked up. The sky through the ice seemed distant and strangely beautiful. He planted the bulbs in the soil warmed by the chimney. He covered them with soil. He watered them with warm water. And he waited. 4 days later, the first green sprout broke through the soil. He stood and looked at the thin, pale stem poking out of the frozen ground in the icy greenhouse in the center of white doom. And something tightened in his throat. Not from the cold. He called for Sakyeon. She came. She saw. She stood in silence. Then she knelt down next to the sprout and stared at it for a long time. When she stood up, her face was wet. She left. 10 minutes later, the entire Seouljeon was standing in the greenhouse. 30 people. They were looking at the green sprout. Some were crying. Nam Gi-ho wasn't crying. He stood and watched, and his stony face was softer than ever. Tae-ho touched the icy wall with his fingertips and shook his head. The boy with bandaged ears reached out and gently touched the leaf. Then he looked at Dohyeon and smiled, for the first time since he had come to the valley. Yuri returned as she had promised, after a month. Not alone. 12 people came with her, men and women of the Silver Wolf tribe, hunters, trackers, people born of the ice. They entered Seouljeon through the gate in the wall and stopped. They looked at the houses, at the smoke, at the people, at the wall glistening with ice in the sun. Yuri led them to Dohyeon. He was standing at the entrance to the greenhouse. Behind him, blue light filtered through the icy roof, and inside, 23 onion sprouts were turning green. Yuri looked at the greenhouse. She went in. She came out. She looked at Dohyeon. She said one word. Where? He understood. He led her to a clearing by the northern wall of the valley. Flat, sheltered, facing north, just as she had asked. He showed her the blueprint, a house for 12 people, a hearth by the north wall, ventilation through a passage for the spirits of the wind in the south wall, a solid east wall a meter thick, a wolf symbol above the entrance. Yuri looked at the blueprint, then at him. Then she turned to her people and said something in a language he didn't understand. 12 people silently began unloading their travel bundles. They stayed. By the end of the 4th month, Seouljeon was home to 42 people. Dohyeon stood on the wall and looked down at the valley in the light of the short day. Smoke rose from 5 chimneys. Someone was carrying water from the river. Someone was chopping peat. Taeho's hammer clanged at the forge. Soohyun came out of the greenhouse with a bunch of green onions in her hands and headed for the kitchen. 2 silver wolf hunters returned with their catch. A deer. Enough meat for everyone for a week. A boy with bandaged ears ran toward them, and his ears were already free of bandages. Pink. Healed. Whole. Dohyeon watched all this, and the system was silent because there was nothing to calculate here. Everything had already been calculated, built, working. He just stood there and looked at the place that 3 months ago had been an empty valley where no one had lived for 300 years. And then a signal sounded quietly and evenly in his head. The system. Not a calculation, not an analysis. Something else. Like a distant reverberation, like an echo from something immense and ancient stirring deep beneath the ice. For a single second. Then silence. Dohyeon froze. He listened. Nothing. Silence. The wind, the sound of a hammer, children's laughter. He stood there for another minute, then he climbed down from the wall. He walked toward the stove, toward the warmth, toward his people. He remembered the echo. But now there were more important matters. Now he had to figure out how to feed 42 people until spring, when the mountain passes would open and whatever was coming would arrive. The 5th month brought 2 events. The first was good. The second was not. The good news came on the 3rd day when Yoon Sung-ho brought a caravan. Not people, cargo. 3 heavy bales on leather sleds. Inside was what Dohyeon had asked for a month ago. Grain. 20 pounds of barley. Coarse, damp, unfit by the standards of the southern markets. For Soljeon, it was gold. Salt. 5 pounds. Rock-hard gray with impurities, but salt. Cloth. 3 pieces of coarse canvas. Rope, 4 skeins, and iron. 12 strips of raw iron that Yoon Sung-ho had traded with smugglers on the southern slope of the ridge for 3 sable pelts obtained by the silver wolf hunters. Taeho saw the iron, and his hands trembled. Not from the cold, from anticipation. 12 strips meant 12 knives, or 6 axes, or 4 spearheads and 8 arrowheads, or tools. Dohyeon distributed the iron personally. 4 strips for weapons. Nam Gi-ho would decide what was needed most. 4 for tools. Shovels. Wedges for splitting stone. Brackets for construction. 4 in reserve. Taeho nodded and went to the forge. An hour later, the rhythmic clang of a hammer came from the smithy, and Dohyeon knew the blacksmith wouldn't come out for 2 days. The second incident occurred on the night of the 5th day. Yoon Sung-ho sat by the stove in the large house, his face ashen. He had been silent since evening. He ate little. He answered questions with brief nods. Dohyeon waited. He didn't press him. When everyone had gone to bed, the captain spoke up. He told them that Emperor Jung Hae-won had died in the capital 3 weeks ago. The news had reached the northern outpost via a courier who had barely made his way through the snow. The 7th prince, So Gyung-jae, had taken the throne. Officially, he had not yet been crowned. The coronation would take place in the spring, once the mourning period ended. But he already held power. His mother, the concubine So Myung-hee, had become regent. The So clan faction had taken control of the court.
3 ministers from the old council had been executed for treason. 6 more had fled. Jung Ha-in, Do-hyun's half-sister, is locked up in the inner palace under house arrest. The fire priests declared Gyeongjae the chosen one and confirmed his right to the throne with an omen. One of the fading artifacts supposedly flared up brighter in his presence. A charade, Do-hyun was certain. But for the people, that was enough. Yoon Sung-ho fell silent. Then he added the most important part. A new decree. White Doom is no longer a place of exile. It is now a restricted zone. Anyone found north of the Wall of Silence is subject to execution on the spot without trial. The official reason, a threat from the far north. Black riders, cities of snow, strange banners. The Empire is closing the border. The real reason. So Gyeongjae knows that Do-hyun's body was never found. He knows that the convoy captain reported his death, but did not return the ring. The ring was with Do-hyun, on his finger. He wore it because the gold-band ring was the only reminder of who that body had been before he arrived. Now the ring had become a marker. If anyone sees it and reports it. Do-hyun took off the ring. He twirled it between his fingers. Then he gave it to Yoon Sung-ho. He told him to take it to the southern slope and sell it to the smugglers. The gold would come in handy. The captain took the ring. He looked at the crest of the Lee family. Then he hid it in his wallet. They didn't speak of it. The news about the emperor changed the atmosphere in Seoljun. The people knew who had taken them in. They knew he was a prince. They knew he had been exiled. Now they knew his father was dead, and the throne had been seized by the very man who had sent him to die. Nam Gi-ho was the first to come to Do-hyun. He stood before him. He spoke plainly, said that he had served the throne for 30 years and knew what usurpation was. He said that if the prince gave the order, he would go south and plunge a knife into the new emperor. Do-hyun looked at him calmly. He said he would not give the order. He said that a single knife would change nothing. With Gyeongjae, it's not a person. It's a system, a clan, a faction, an army, priests. To defeat the system, you need another system, a better one. Nam Gi-ho was silent for a moment. Then he asked, "What kind?" Do-hyun answered, "One where people are fed, where people are healed, where people are taught, where every person is worth more than their title. One where a boy with frostbitten ears will, in 10 years, become a master, or a teacher, or a warrior, because he was given a chance and not left to die." Nam Gi-ho looked at him. Then he nodded. Not like a soldier nodding to an order, like a man agreeing with another person. He turned and walked toward the training ground. There, 9 men and 3 women were waiting for him. People he was teaching to handle weapons. Soyeon appeared at the end of the 5th month, Yoon Sung-ho's daughter. He hadn't brought her. She had come on her own. A 3-day journey following her father's trail from the outpost to the valley. Alone. With a bow on her back and a quiver of arrows. In an army cloak stolen from the supply room. Yoon Sung-ho saw her at the gate and turned pale. Not from the cold. She stood before her father and spoke softly, yet so that every word fell like a stone. She said she knew, from the very beginning, that she saw him leave with the bales, how he returned without them, how he lied in his reports. She said she'd been watching for a month, keeping silent and waiting, and then she decided she'd had enough of waiting. Yoon Sung-ho stood and listened. His face was stony.
His hands were clenched. He'd brought dozens of people to Seolgyong, but he'd wanted to protect his own daughter. He'd kept her at the outpost, safe. And she had ruined his plan with a single crossing of the icy desert.
Dohyeon watched from afar. The system assessed her automatically. 22 years old, above average height, broad shoulders for a woman, confident, precise movements. A former palace guard. A stranger's memory confirmed it. Yoon So-yeon had served in Princess Ha-in's personal guard before her father fell from grace. An archer, one of the best in the garrison. They had her quietly removed, not executed, just transferred to the north along with her father. No charges, no trial, just removed. When the father and daughter finished their conversation, So-yeon approached Dohyeon. She bowed, briefly, in a military fashion. She said she had come to serve, not her father, him. Because for the first time in 20 years, her father looked alive and not like a dead man in uniform. And she wanted to be where her father was alive. Dohyeon accepted her. He showed her Seolgyong. She walked beside him and looked at the wall, at the houses, at the smithy, at the greenhouse. She stopped by the greenhouse. She stared for a long time at the green sprouts through the icy roof. Then she turned to him. Her eyes were shining, but her face was calm. She asked how she could be of help. Dohyeon answered. He said she needed arrows that wouldn't break in the cold. Ordinary wooden shafts lose their flexibility in the cold and crack on impact. She needed different ones, bone or composite, bone and tendon, flexibility at any temperature. The system provided the specifications: diameter, weight, balance, Tahoe steel tips. She listened. Her eyes changed as she understood. This boy knew more about arrows than her instructors in the palace guard. She said she would start tomorrow. Dohyeon nodded. She went to her father. In the evening, Yoon Sung-ho came to Dohyeon. He stood silently. Then he said he didn't want this. Didn't want to drag his daughter to a cursed land. Dohyeon replied that she had come of her own accord, and that Seolgyong had long since ceased to be a cursed land. The captain looked at the smoke rising from the chimneys, at the light streaming from the windows, at the laughter drifting from the big house. Then he said he wanted to stay, for good. The outpost would manage without him. His deputy was a reliable man who didn't ask questions. And here, this is where he belongs, next to his daughter, next to the people he brought here and to whom he owes a debt. Dohyeon placed a hand on his shoulder. The first touch in 5 months of knowing each other. He said he'd been waiting for this. He said the captain's place had always been here. Yoon Sung-ho closed his eyes. He opened them. He nodded. The next day he took off his Northern Guard cloak. He rolled it up. He put it away. He put on the wolf fur coat sewn by the women of the Silver Wolf, and he stood on the wall, on guard, like Nam Gi-ho, like one of his own. The 6th month. Spring was approaching. Dohyeon could feel it in the air. It wasn't warmer, but the light was changing. The days were getting longer, by an hour, by 2. The sun rose higher, and the snow began to glisten so brightly it hurt his eyes. The system warned him. Snow blindness. The bright light reflected off the snow damages the cornea. Protection is needed. He made goggles, bone ones, strips of reindeer bone with narrow slits.
an ancient design used by the Inuit for thousands of years. Taeho reproduced it from a drawing. 20 pairs in 2 days. For every resident of Soljan. When people put them on and found that their eyes no longer hurt, Dohyeon became just a little less of a boy prince and just a little bit more like someone else in their eyes. They didn't yet know exactly who, but they listened to him differently now. Contact with the southern merchants happened by chance. The silver wolf hunters stumbled upon a small caravan stuck in the snow on the southern pass. 3 people, 2 pack animals, cargo frozen in bales. The hunters brought them to Soljan because the people were freezing and because Dohyeon had said to take everyone in. The merchants were named Cho In-ho and his sons, Cho Tae-soo and Cho Myung-gi. Small traders from the southern principality of Hanso. They were carrying fabrics and spices to the northern outposts. They got lost in a blizzard, lost their way, lost hope. When they were brought into a warm house, seated by the stove, and given hot food, the elder Cho In-ho cried like a child. He wasn't shy about it. Dohyeon let them rest for a day. Then he spoke with Cho In-ho, not as a prince to a merchant, but as a partner to a partner. He asked what he was carrying, how much the goods cost, what the prices were in the southern markets, what the routes were, what the dangers were. Cho In-ho spoke willingly. The merchant knew how to read people. This boy had saved his life. This boy commanded a settlement in a cursed land. This boy asked questions that trading houses ask, not bands of robbers. Cho In-ho told him everything. The southern principalities were suffocating. The fiery artifacts were fading. Winters had grown longer and colder, even in the south. Harvests were failing. The new emperor had raised taxes by 1/3. Trade routes were blocked by patrols demanding bribes. Smuggling had become the only way to trade, and the northern route through the mountains, the most dangerous but the most profitable, because the outposts triple the price for southern goods. Dohyeon listened. The system was running at full capacity, and he knew that tomorrow would bring a migraine and bloodshed. But right now, something else was more important. He saw the trade network. He saw the hubs. He saw the weak spots. He saw opportunities. He offered Cho In-ho a deal. Solgyong would become a transit point on the northern route, a safe passage through White Doom, warm lodging, food, protection from bandits. In exchange, Dohyeon would take a tithe from every caravan. Not in money, in goods. Grain, cloth, iron, seeds, tools. Cho In-ho did the math in his head. Then he said it was more profitable than bribes at the checkpoints. And safer. And more reliable. Because the boy prince, unlike the officials, doesn't lie. You can tell. The deal was sealed with a handshake. 2 days later, the caravan headed south. Cho In-ho carried with him information worth more than his goods. The coordinates of a safe passage, the terms of the deal, and 5 pairs of bone goggles for snow blindness as a sample of what Solgyong could offer. The first assassins arrived at the beginning of the 7th month. 4 of them. Professionals. They crossed the mountains so quietly that even the silver wolf hunters didn't notice them until they were halfway to the valley. Yuri was the first to notice. Not with her eyes. With something else. She came to Dohyeon at dawn and said the ice was restless. She said 4 pairs of feet were walking wrong. People who don't want to leave traces are walking wrong. They tread too carefully. The snow can sense it. Dohyeon didn't ask for clarification. Over the past 5 months, he had learned to trust what Yuri called the voice of the ice. It wasn't magic. Or maybe it was. He didn't know.
but she had never been wrong. He called Nam-gi-ho. He gathered 6 men, the best of those he had trained, plus So-yeon with her bow. They left the valley through a narrow passage in the western wall that Dohyeon had spotted back in the first few weeks. Not through the gate, through a crack in the rock camouflaged by snow. An emergency exit. He always planned 2 routes, one in and one out. Always. The system activated when they climbed onto the ridge. 4 figures against a white background, 600 meters away, moving in single file. Light gear, no packs, no supplies for a long journey. So they don't intend to stay. They came to do the job and leave. Their movements are economical and precise. Professional killers. The So faction or the priests. It doesn't matter. The result is the same. Dohyeon ran through the plan in his head. Not a fight. 4 professionals against his men. Those were losses he couldn't afford. The environment. Use the environment. He looked at the slope the assassins were walking down. His system instantly processed the data. The gradient, the snow depth, the snowpack structure, the temperature, and that overhang over there. A snow cornice hanging over the trail. Tons of snow on the rock ledge. Holding on by a thin layer of frozen snowpack. If we cut the base. He explained the plan to Nam-gi-ho in 10 words. The corporal understood at a glance. 20 years on the northern border had taught him to read the snow as well as Dohyeon. Maybe even better. Just differently. 3 fighters circled around the ridge. So-yeon took up a position on a rock higher up the slope. Bow drawn. An arrow with a bone tip, by Taeho on the string. Not for killing. For fear. For guidance. The killers were moving directly beneath the overhang. Nam-gi-ho cut through the snowpack with a single precise blow of his axe to the base of the overhang. 3 seconds of silence. Then a crunch. And the white wall began to move downward. Not an avalanche. A landslide. Directed. Controlled. The mass of snow crashed down onto the trail right between the 2 pairs of assassins. It split them apart. The front pair found themselves cut off from the rear. A 3-meter-high wall of snow stood between them. The front 2 turned around. Instinct. They tried to escape. And they saw So-yeon on the rock with her bow drawn, and 3 of Nam-gi-ho's men blocking their retreat. The 2 in the rear tried to climb over the debris, and they saw Nam-gi-ho with an axe on the ridge. No one fought. The 4 professional assassins stood in the snow and realized they had lost not to a man, but to the mountain. They were brought to Sol-gyeong in chains. Dohyeon interrogated each one separately. He didn't torture them. The system wouldn't let him, and he didn't want to anyway. He asked calmly, who sent them? How much were they paid? Did they know anything useful? 2 of them remained silent. The 3rd spoke up when Dohyeon offered him a hot meal and dry clothes. He said they had been sent by consort So Min-hee, through a middleman, through 3 middlemen. The price for the prince's head. 500 gold pieces. A lot, but not exorbitant. So they don't really believe he's alive. They're checking. The 4th one spoke up on his own, without haggling. He looked at Dohyeon with a long gaze and asked if it was true that the prince had built a city in the ice. Dohyeon replied that it was true. He offered to show him. The 4th assassin turned out to be a man named Kwon Dae-ho, a former officer of the secret guard, stripped of his rank for refusing to kill the rebel's family. He'd joined the mercenaries because he had nowhere else to go. He looked at Sol-gyeong, at the wall, at the houses, at the greenhouse, at the people who looked at him without fear. Then he turned to Dohyeon and asked if they took in mercenaries here who were tired of killing. Dohyeon took him in. He let the other 3 go, unarmed, with food for 3 days.
in the direction of the southern pass. Nam Gi-ho objected. He said the ones who were let go would tell. Dohyeon replied that that was exactly what he wanted. Let them tell. Let the capital know that the prince is alive, that he has a city, walls, people, that he doesn't kill assassins, but feeds them and lets them go. This message, stronger than any sword. Nam Gi-ho shook his head, but said nothing. The second detachment arrived a month later. Not assassins, soldiers. 20 men in black cloaks. The Black Feather Squad. An elite unit of the Secret Guard. They walked openly. They didn't hide. They walked like masters on their own land. Yuri sensed them 2 days in advance. The hunters confirmed it. Dohyeon was preparing. The system ran around the clock, and he paid for it with nosebleeds every morning and migraines that made his vision go dark. But the plan was ready. Not a fight. 20 elite soldiers against his men would be a rout. But 20 elite soldiers against Winter is a different story. He did the route they were taking. The only passable path to the valley led through the Three Winds Gorge. Narrow, long, 2 kilometers between rock walls, and swept by 3 streams of air from different directions, hence the name. The system calculated the temperature factoring in the wind, -30 on the thermometer, plus a wind speed of 15 meters per second. The wind chill was -52. A human body in standard Bekan Northern Army gear begins to lose combat effectiveness after 40 minutes in such cold. After 2 hours, frostbite. In 4 hours, death. The Three Winds Gorge is a 2-hour trek, but only if you know the way. If you don't, 3, 4, 5. Dohyeon sent the Silver Wolf hunters, not to attack, to work on the tracks. They passed through the gorge a day before the squad and did 3 things. They covered all existing trails. They laid false tracks leading to dead ends. And they set up snow blockades in 3 places. Not piles, barriers. Packed snow across the gorge, as tall as a man. They could be crossed, but each one took half an hour of digging, half an hour in the cold, without moving, standing in the wind. The Black Feather Detachment entered the gorge in the morning. By evening, they hadn't come out. Dohyeon's scout watched from the bow. The soldiers hit the first bottleneck after an hour. They started digging. They got through. They followed a false trail, a dead end. They turned back. They found another path, a second bottleneck. Digging again. The squad leader tried to organize the men, but the cold was taking its toll. Dohyeon knew this process by heart, the stages of hypothermia, first shivering, then confusion, then drowsiness, then indifference. Elite soldiers clad in the standard gear of the Southern Army. Heavy steel armor that turns into an icy sarcophagus in the cold. Leather boots that get soaked and freeze. Woolen cloaks that absorb moisture and stop keeping them warm. Everything this world knew about protection from the cold was built on fire artifacts. Without them, the Southern Army was defenseless against winter. By morning of the second day, Black Feather's squad had emerged from the gorge. Not from the right side. They turned back. 6 could not walk. 3rd-degree frostbite. 4 carried them on their backs. The rest were barely able to walk. The scout reported to Dohyeon. He listened and said nothing. Then he gave an order. Send men after the detachment. Not to attack, to help. Hot food, warm furs, ointment for frostbite. Nam Gi-ho thought he had misheard. Dohyeon repeated himself. Nam Gi-ho looked at him. Then he nodded and went.
5 of Sul-jun's fighters caught up with the Black Feather Detachment on the southern slope of the ridge. They laid out bundles of food and furs on the snow before them. And they left, silently, without a word. The squad leader stood and watched them go. Then he looked at his men, frozen, broken, and at the bundles of aid from the very man they had come to kill. Dohyeon didn't know what he was thinking, but 6 months later, 3 of those soldiers came to Sul-jun on their own. Deserters, defectors, people who remembered hot porridge in the snow. After the Black Feather Detachment, there was a lull. 2 months. Dohyeon made use of every day. The population grew. People came on their own. Cho In-ho's merchants told stories in the south about the city in the ice. Rumors spread. Refugees from northern villages ravaged by new taxes. Deserters from the garrisons. Families of exiles who had learned that their husbands and fathers were alive. Every week, new people entered the gates of Sul-jun. 5, 10, 17. Dohyeon welcomed them all. He assigned a place to each one. He gave each one a task. He explained the rules to each one. Here, everyone is equal. Here, everyone works. Here, everyone eats the same food. Here, no one beats children or abandons the elderly. Anyone who disagrees is free to leave. No one is forced to stay. No one left. By the end of the 8th month, 110 people lived in Sul-jun. The 9th month. A year since the boy prince opened his eyes in a snowdrift on the rocky plateau. Sul-jun was no longer a village. Sul-jun was a town. Small, crowded, but a town. 5 residential buildings, a barracks, a smithy with 2 forges, a greenhouse doubled in size, a bathhouse, Park Ji-won's infirmary with 2 rooms and a supply of ointments and decoctions, a warehouse where Soo-hyun ruled like a queen, a pen for the reindeer tamed by the silver wolf hunters, and the wall. The wall had grown to 4 meters high. Taeho had forged iron clamps for it that held the ice blocks more securely than any mortar. Nam Gi-ho set up 3 firing positions at the top, each with a windbreak. So-yeon personally zeroed in on each one. From the highest point of the wall, she hit the target 200 paces away with an arrow. Every single time. An army. 150 fighters. Nam Gi-ho trained them for 6 months. Every day, without a break. Using a method they had developed together with Dohyeon. Not a southern method. Not formation combat in heavy armor on flat ground. Northern. Fast. Mobile. Small groups of 5. Skis made of wood and bone. White camouflage skins. Attacking from the blizzard. Retreating into the blizzard. Knowledge of the terrain. The ability to survive in the cold without a fire. For a day, 2, or 3. Each fighter wore gear that Dohyeon had personally designed. Armor made of leather stitched with bone plates. Lightweight, flexible, retaining its properties in the cold. Under the armor, 2 layers of clothing with an air gap. A principle that Dohyeon drilled into everyone. It's not the thickness that keeps you warm, but the air between the layers. 3 thin layers are warmer than 1 thick one. Double-layered leather boots stuffed with dry moss. Lined mittens. Leather and bone helmets covering the face down to the eyes. Weapons. Taeho forged them non-stop. Swords made of frost-resistant steel. Short, wide, with thick pommels. Not beautiful, not elegant. Workhorses. Spearheads, arrowheads, axes, knives. Every blade was put to the test.
Tae-ho struck them against stone at -40 degrees. If they cracked, he remade them. If it bent and sprang back, he approved it. Soyeon conducted the first test shots with the new bows. Composite, bone, horn, and sinew, a design that Dohyeon had recalled from the Mongolian steppes. Short, powerful, accurate at 150 paces, and they worked in any kind of cold. Soyeon shot first. The arrow flew straight and pierced the target with such force that it went right through the board. She stood with the bow in her hands and looked at her work, at the arrow she had made herself. From bone she had worked on for a week, with a tip that Tae-ho had forged at her request. She had done it. Her hands had done something right. Dohyeon stood beside her. He saw how her shoulders straightened, how her breathing became steadier, how something inside her that had been constricted for years finally let go. He said nothing. There was no need. They called themselves the Snow Wolves. It wasn't Dohyeon who named them. They did it themselves. Nam-gi-ho suggested it. Yuri approved because the wolf is the guardian spirit of her tribe, and to share its name with the warriors means to accept them into the family. 150 snow wolves, men and women, former soldiers and former peasants, northerners and southerners, united by one thing. They were all dead. On paper, by right, by the law of Bacon. And they were all alive, against all odds. Dohyeon looked at them during morning roll call. They stood at attention. Their breath steamed. White furs on their shoulders. Weapons gleamed with cold steel. Nam-gi-ho walked the length of the formation, his face stony, his eyes sharp. He had turned a handful of ragged men into a unit. Not the best army in Bacon, but an army. A real one. A ready one. By the 10th month, the rumors had reached the capital in full force. Yoon Sung-ho found out through his old connections at the outposts. So Kyung-jae knows. He knows that Dohyeon is alive. He knows that the city exists. He knows that the assassins didn't return, and that the elite unit returned broken. And he is furious. His mother, So Min-hee, is even more furious. But now it is winter, and the roads are closed, and the army cannot pass through the mountains. In the spring. Everything will happen in the spring. Dohyeon nodded when he heard this. Spring means spring. 3 months until spring. He called a council. Soljeon's first formal council. Yoon Sung-ho, Nam-gi-ho, Tae-ho, Soo-hyun, Park Ji-won, Soyeon, Yuri, Kwon Dae-ho, a former mercenary who had become the head of intelligence, and Cho In-ho, who by this time had moved to Soljeon with his family, turning a business connection into a permanent partnership. 9 people around the table that Tae-ho had knocked together from planks traded for with southern merchants. On the table lay a map. Dohyeon had been drawing it for 3 months. White doom stretching from the wall of silence to the third ridge. Every pass, every gorge, every water source, every settlement of the northern tribes. Information from the silver wolf hunters overlaid on the system's engineering analysis. Dohyeon spoke up. The army will arrive in the spring. Not 20 men. Thousands. General Han Jun-mo, the Empire's finest commander in the Empire. 20,000 according to Kwon Dae-ho's latest data. Maybe more. Against 1,500, including the militia. Silence at the table. Nam-gi-ho clenched his jaw. Soyeon turned pale but did not look away. Yoon Sung-ho stared at the map with the face of a man counting the dead.
Dohyeon continued. He said that defend Seolgyung. Everyone froze. He said that defending the valley was a trap. One wall, one entrance. If the enemy cuts off the exit, they starve and die. No, he would not defend the valley. He would defend the winter. Their battlefield was not Seolgyung. Their battlefield was the entire White Death. Every pass, every ravine, every meter of snow and ice. Han Junmo's army would march through the mountains. Heavy, slow, in gear not designed for true frost. With supply trains that would get bogged down in the snow. With horses that fall on the ice. And every step this army takes will cost it men, not from the swords of the snow wolves, from the cold. He unfolded the plan. The system had run non-stop for 2 days while he was drawing it up. He'd had 4 nosebleeds. The migraine was so bad he couldn't open his eyes. But the plan was ready. The frozen pass. The only passable route for a large army with supply trains. Narrow, long, exposed to all the winds. Here, he pointed on the map, 3 choke points. Snow jams like in the Three Winds Gorge, but on a larger scale. Blocked passages that would force the army to stop and dig. Every stop meant hours in the cold. Here, false trails leading the vanguard into dead ends. Here, positions for archers on the cliffs. Not for combat, for pressure. Arrows from the darkness, from the blizzard. An invisible enemy. Psychological pressure on soldiers who are already freezing and afraid. And here, the main position. A narrow pass where the trail narrows to 10 meters. An ice wall. Pykrit. Like in Seolgyun, but thicker. 2 meters thick. 5 meters high. It completely blocks the passage. The army will run into it and stop. And it will stand in the wind, in the cold, without cover, until it turns back or freezes to death. The council listened. Nam Gi-hyo traced his finger across the map. His eyes were ablaze. He wasn't seeing a defense plan. He was seeing a trap. A giant trap made of snow and cold. Yuri nodded quietly. To her, it was as clear as breathing. Use the winter. Don't fight the enemy. Let the winter fight for you. Tae-ho asked how many arrows were needed. Dohyeon gave a number. Tae-ho nodded and went to the horn. So-yeon asked how many archers she had. Dohyeon said 30. She nodded and went to train. Yoon Sung-ho asked what to do with the civilians if the plan didn't work. Do-hyun replied, evacuation, the northern route through Silver Wolf territory. Yuri confirmed she would accept them. All of them. No matter how many came. Kwon Dae-ho asked one thing. What if General Han Jun-mo turned out to be smarter than expected? Do-hyun looked at him. He said that Han Jun-mo was Baekon's smartest commander, and that he would be exactly as smart as expected. But a commander's intelligence is useless when his soldiers can't stand on their feet from the cold. This isn't war. It's physics. Spring came to White Doom not with warmth, but with light. The sun rose higher, and the snow began to blind even through bone-framed glasses. The temperature hadn't changed. -30 during the day, -40 at night. But the roads became passable because the blizzards had receded. The winds had died down. The sky became clear and harsh in its transparency. The army arrived 3 weeks after the mountain passes opened. Kwon Dae-ho was the first to see them. His scouts were watching from the ridges. The column stretched for 4 kilometers. Infantry, cavalry, supply trains, banners bearing the So clan's crest, black cloaks, red shields, and at the front, on horseback, a man in plain gray armor. General Han Jun-mo. The scout described him this way. Not young. Straight back. Calm face. He looks at the mountains the way a man looks who has already made up his mind and has no intention of changing it. 20,000. Kwon Dae-ho confirmed it. Maybe 22. Dohyeon listened to the report and did what he had been doing every morning for the past 3 months. He calculated. The distance to the pass was a 4-day march for such a column. The speed of movement in the mountains is 3 kilometers per hour. With the supply wagons, 2. They will enter the mountains in 2 days. And then the problems will begin. The first day in the mountains passed without incident. The army moved slowly but steadily. Han Jun-mo led the column competently. Reconnaissance ahead, flank patrols on the ridges. The supply train in the middle, under guard. Textbook. Dohyeon had expected exactly this. The best commander makes no mistakes. He does everything right. And that is exactly what will kill him. Because what is right for a southern war on the plains and what is right for a winter war in the mountains are 2 different things. On the second night, the temperature dropped to -43. The army set up camp in an open field between 2 ridges. Campfires, tents, everything by the book. Dohyeon knew what was happening in that camp without leaving Seogyen. The system calculated it for him. 20,000 men are burning fires with firewood they've brought with them. A 5-day supply of firewood. That's the maximum a supply train can carry without sacrificing provisions. On the 5th day, the firewood will run out. They don't know about peat. There are no shrubs in the mountains. And then, on the 3rd day, the first snowdrift. The vanguard is stuck against a wall of packed snow blocking the pass. 3 meters high, 10 meters wide. Han Jun-mo sent in the sappers. They dug for 4 hours. In the wind, at -35 degrees. 6 sappers suffered frostbite, 2 seriously. The army lost half a day. Dohyeon found out about it 2 hours later. Kwon Dae-ho's scouts flawlessly. They glided along the ridges in white furs, invisible against the snowy backdrop. They relayed signals using smoke and mirrors made of polished ice. A system that Dohyeon had built not with magic, but with logistics and knowledge of the terrain. On the 4th day, a false trail. The vanguard followed the tracks laid by the Silver Wolf hunters. 2 hours in the wrong direction. A dead end. A U-turn. Another 2 hours back. 4 hours lost. 4 hours in the cold. Han Jun-mo rotated the scouts, but his men didn't know the mountains, didn't know the snow, didn't know how to read tracks when the wind blows them away in an hour. On the 5th day, the firewood ran out, just as Dohyeon had calculated. A night without fires at -40. 20,000 men in tents that don't hold the heat, in armor that draws the last warmth from their bodies. In the morning, 70 men didn't get up. Frostbite, hypothermia. 12 dead, frozen to death in their sleep. Han Jun-mo didn't turn back. Dohyeon knew he wouldn't turn back. The Empire's greatest commander does not retreat from the weather. He retreats from force. And he had not yet seen that force. On the 6th day, the arrows. The snow wolves worked from the ridge. 30 archers. So-yeon was in command. Not a volley. Single shots from the blizzard. An arrow flies from the white, hits the snow at the commander's feet,
or the sentry's shield, or the supply train, without killing, just scaring. An invisible enemy that strikes and vanishes. The soldiers began to get nervous. They had come to fight a rebel, but they were fighting ghosts and the frost. On the 7th day, the army entered the pass and saw a wall, 5 meters high, 2 meters thick, ice and peat crumbs, picrate, glistening in the sun like a gemstone, blocking the passage from rock to rock. At the top of the wall stood figures in white furs, silent, motionless. Khan Zhang-mo halted the army. He stood on his horse and looked at the wall for a long time. Then he sent men to check the flanks. The flanks are blocked by cliffs. A bypass is impossible. The wall can be breached, but there is nothing to do it with. There are no battering rams. There are no logs for a battering ram. Ladders are useless because the wall is drenched with water and covered with a crust of ice that is impossible to climb. He could have ordered a tunnel to be dug. Frozen ground cannot be dug without fire. There is no fire. He could have ordered them to wait in the wind at -30, without firewood, without shelter, without hope that the wall would collapse on its own. It will not collapse. In the cold, the wall is stronger than concrete. The army stood before the wall for 2 days. 2 days of hell. The wind did not die down. The temperature did not rise. The soldiers burned their last supplies. They dismantled the wagons for firewood. They burned saddles. They burned clothing from the supply train. Every hour, frostbitten men were carried out of the camp. By the end of the 2nd day, the losses had reached 2,000. Not killed, frozen, incapacitated, people who could no longer stand or hold a weapon. Han Junmo stood his ground. He didn't retreat to his tent. He stood with his soldiers. His gray armor was covered in frost. His face had turned gray. But he stood. On the 3rd morning, Dohyeon emerged from behind the wall, alone, unarmed, without armor, wearing a wolf fur coat. In his hands, a pot of hot porridge and 2 wooden spoons. He walked across the snowy field between the wall and the Imperial Army's camp. 200 meters. Open ground. Any archer could have killed him. Not a single arrow was fired. 20,000 frozen people watched the lone figure walking toward them with a pot in his hands and didn't understand what they were seeing. Dohyeon reached the commander's tent. Han Junmo stood at the entrance. A gray face, chapped lips, eyes red from the wind and sleeplessness. He looked at the boy prince, at the pot steaming before him, at the wooden spoons. Dohyeon stopped in front of him. He said the general hadn't eaten in 3 days and that they needed to talk. He set the pot down on a rock. He held out a spoon. Han Junmo looked at the spoon, at the steam rising from the porridge, at the boy's face, which was calm and held neither anger nor triumph nor mockery. The general took the spoon. He sat down on the rock and began to eat, in silence. The porridge was hot, made of barley, with meat, with salt. The most ordinary porridge they cooked in Seoljeon every day. Han Junmo ate, and his hands trembled, not from the cold, or perhaps from the cold as well. Dohyeon sat down next to him and ate from the same pot. 2 spoons in 1 pot, an ancient gesture of the Baekon. To share food is to share the hearth. To share the hearth is to become family. The general of the empire's finest army and the young prince sent to kill him ate porridge from the same pot, while thousands froze all around them. When the pot was empty, Han Junmo spoke. His voice was hoarse, cracking from the cold. He said he had served the throne for 30 years, that he had fought in 12 campaigns, that he had never lost a single one, and that in all 30 years he had not seen a single day when the throne had cared for a soldier freezing to death. But Dohyeon, the night before the battle, had sent warm furs to his frostbitten men. The general fell silent. Then he said that his men were dying, not by swords, from the cold, and that he could order them to die for the throne, but he could not order them to freeze to death for a man he did not respect. He stood up, old, frozen, endlessly weary. He looked down at Dohyeon from above. Then he dropped to one knee, in the snow, in the frost, before a 19-year-old boy, and uttered the words that changed the course of Bacon's history. He said that he was his, and the army was his. Dohyeon lifted him by the shoulder, told him to stand up, said he didn't need his knees, he needed hands, a general's hands that know how to fight, and a head that knows how to think, and a heart that knows how not to betray. Han Junmo stood up, nodded, turned toward the camp, and gave the order. The army laid down its weapons. The wall opened. 20,000 men entered White Doom, not as conquerors, but as guests. The snow wolves met them at the wall, with food, with hot water, with furs, with ointment for frostbite. Park Ji-won worked for 4 days without sleep, treating the frostbitten. Soo-hyun gathered all the supplies and fed the people in a steady stream. Taeho opened the smithy to repair their equipment. Yuri brought her hunters to help with accommodations. Sol-gyong took in 20,000. He couldn't fit them all, but he took them in. Tents in the valley, peat fires, hot food, warmth, and humanity. After 3 days, Han Junmo's army ceased to be an enemy force. It became part of something that had no name yet, but it already had a form. The first 10 days after the army's arrival were chaos. 20,000 people in a place designed for 200. Food was running out. They couldn't keep up with heating the water. Peat firewood burned for days on end, but there weren't enough stoves. 30 people slept in each tent. It was warmer in these tents than outside, but colder than it should have been. Frostbite, disease, a cough that wouldn't go away for weeks, and fear. 20,000 soldiers who, just yesterday, had been part of the Imperial Army and today had become deserters. For this, execution. For this, death, not only for them but also for their families back in the south. They knew this. Han Junmo knew. Dohyeon knew. And that is precisely why Dohyeon didn't waste a single minute. He divided the army into 3 parts, immediately, without discussion. Han Junmo supported him. The first part, 10,000 men, under the general's own command, the fighting corps, the best soldiers, those who could still stand and hold a weapon. They remained in the pass area. The task? To rebuild the camp according to Soljan's principles. Double walls, long-burning stoves, peat heating. Dohyeon gave Han Junmo the blueprints, detailed, with dimensions, with calculations. The general looked at the blueprints and his expression changed. He was a military commander, not a builder. But he knew how to read plans and saw that every line was precise. Every number was justified. This wasn't fantasy, it was knowledge. He took the blueprints and began to build. 10,000 pairs of hands under the command of a man who knew how to lead people like no one else. Within a week, the camp ceased to be a camp. It became a second city,
nameless for now, but with houses, with stoves, with warmth. Part 2. 5,000. The wounded, the frostbitten, the sick, those who could not work. They were transferred to the Soljan Valley. Park Ji-won received assistance. Among the imperial soldiers there were 4 military doctors. Dohyeon gave them everything he had: ointments, decoctions, animal skins, warmth, baths, green onions from the greenhouse, vitamins. After 2 weeks, the mortality rate dropped. After a month, the first wounded began to get up. Park Ji-won worked like a man possessed. He slept no more than 4 hours a day, and his hands trembled with exhaustion. But he didn't stop.
One day, Dohyeon found him sleeping right on the floor of the infirmary next to a patient whose bandage he had been changing. He had fallen asleep without letting go of the bandage. Dohyeon carefully removed the bandage from his fingers. He covered the doctor with a blanket and finished the dressing himself. Part 3. 5,000. Those who could work but weren't fighters. Wagon drivers, cooks, grooms, scribes, tailors, carpenters. The engineering corps, if that word can be applied to people who used to repair wagons. Dohyeon took them for himself, personally. He divided them into groups of 10. Each group had a task. The first group, peat extraction, large-scale, industrial, not by hand, with tools that Taeho would forge. The second group, expansion of the greenhouse complex, not just one greenhouse, but 10. He showed the new design. Long galleries with ice roofs connected by underground chimneys. A large-scale dome system. The soil is heated over an area of 200 square meters. That will be enough to feed 5,000 people with greens. The third group, roads. Packed snow trails between Soljan and the new camp. The fourth group, reconnaissance and cartography. A complete survey of the White Peril within a 50-kilometer radius. Every cave, every spring, every deposit of ore or clay. He had no time to sleep. The system ran almost non-stop, and the price he paid for it was mounting. Nosebleeds became a daily occurrence. Migraines came in waves, and he worked between them like a man running between the waves crashing on the shore. Soyeon was the first to notice. She came to him every evening with a report on marksmanship training, and every evening she saw him paler than the day before. On the 5th day, she didn't leave after the report. She stayed. She stood by the door and watched. Then she approached. She took the charcoal he was drawing with. She said he would kill himself before any enemy could. Dohyeon looked at her straight shoulders, at her hands roughened by the bowstring, at her weather-beaten, serious face. She didn't look away. He could have ordered her to leave. He didn't. He said she was right. He sat down. He closed his eyes. A minute later, he fell asleep right there in his chair. Soyeon stood nearby and watched over him for 2 hours. Then she covered him with a fur and left. In the morning, he woke up and found a cup of warm broth and a piece of bread beside him. Not from the rations. From the supplies that Soyeon had been saving for special occasions. An arrow lay on the bread. New. Perfect. With her personal mark on the fletching. He understood. Han Min-soo appeared a week after the army's crossing. The general's niece. 19 years old. She arrived with a convoy that Han Jun-mo had summoned from the south via a secret courier. The convoy was carrying not supplies, but people. The families of officers who would now be arrested or executed. Wives, children, the elderly.
40 people, and among them Han Min-soo. She entered Solgyong as if entering a cage, back straight, eyes cold, a spear in her hand, armor made of fine southern steel, covered in frost. She looked at Dohyeon and he saw hatred in her eyes. Not toward him personally, toward the situation, toward the fact that she was the niece of a general who had betrayed the throne for the sake of a boy, toward the fact that her family was now a family of traitors, toward the fact that she was 19 years old and no longer has a home. Han Jun-mo led her to Dohyeon, introduced her, briefly, said she wields a spear better than half his officers, that she speaks 6 languages, that she is educated, that she is smart, and that she has a temper that could shatter stone. Min-soo stood there in silence. Dohyeon looked at her, at the spear, at the armor, at the proud face on which pain was etched so deeply it was almost invisible. He didn't offer her a weapon. He didn't ask her to fight. He said he needed someone who would speak on his behalf to other people, to merchants from the south, with the chieftains of the northern tribes, with those who would come later, a person with a name they knew, with languages no one in Solgyong spoke, with a mind that saw beyond words. He offered her the leadership of the diplomatic corps. Min-soo looked at him, silently. 5 seconds. 10. Then she said she agreed, not because she liked him. She turned and walked away. Han Jun-mo looked at Dohyeon. He smiled for the first time since they'd met. He said his niece would get used to it. Dohyeon replied that he knew. By the end of the 2nd month after the battle, White Doom had changed. 2 cities, Solgyong and the new one, which Han Jun-mo named Cholsong, the Iron Star, because Taeho had found a rich vein of iron ore in the mountains near the camp. Not the bog iron, the real stuff. Magnetite. 60% iron content. The system identified the ore instantly, and for the first time in a year, Dohyeon allowed himself to laugh. Not out of joy, out of relief. Iron. Lots of iron. Enough to arm an army. Enough to build. Enough to trade. When Taeho saw the ore, he fell to his knees. Not before Dohyeon. Before the mountain. Then he stood up. Then he ran to the furnace. He hadn't slept for 3 days. The first smelting of the real ore yielded a bar of pure iron the size of 2 fists. Taeho held it in tongs, and his scorched face glowed so brightly that it seemed he himself had become part of the fire. Dohyeon stood nearby and dictated the specifications for the new steel. More carbon, controlled tempering, oil quenching. For the first time, they had enough raw materials not to have to skimp. For the first time, Taeho could forge not just 1 good blade, but 10, 20, 100. Min-soo held her first negotiations a month after arriving. A trade caravan from the southern principality of Hanso. Not small merchants like Cho In-ho. A representative of a trading house. A serious man with serious authority. He had come because the rumors about Solgyong had reached such proportions that it was impossible to ignore them. A city in the ice. An army that had defeated 20,000 without drawing a sword. A prince who builds houses out of snow and grows greens in winter. It was too unusual not to investigate. Min-soo met him in the house that Dohyeon had built specifically for negotiations. With a long table, with a stove, with tea, with green onions on the table. Fresh. In winter. The representative looked at the onions and could not hide his astonishment. Min-soo spoke evenly, in his language, with his accent, with his courtly turns of phrase. She proposed a trade agreement, iron from the Cholsong mine in exchange for grain, cloth, and timber. The terms were generous. Not because Dohyeon didn't know how to bargain, because he needed an ally, not a buyer. The representative left 3 days later, with samples of iron, with a pair of bone spectacles, with 5 pounds of onions, and with a document that Min-soo had drafted in 6 languages, which would become the first international treaty of the Principality of Northern Light. When he left, Min-soo came to Dohyeon. She silently placed a copy of the treaty on the table. She sat down silently. She poured him tea silently. Dohyeon looked at her. She was looking away. Her cheeks were pink, not from the cold. He took the tea, took a sip, said she'd brewed it just the way he liked it. Min-soo stood up and left, quickly, her heels clicking on the stone floor. Dohyeon smiled, for the first time in a long time. Son Ari arrived in Seoul-jeon in the middle of the 2nd year. She didn't come on her own. She was brought there. The silver wolf hunters found 2 people on the southern slope of the 3rd ridge, a girl and a boy. The girl was 17. The boy was 6. She carried him on her back, and when her legs could no longer hold her, she crawled. When she could no longer crawl, she lay down, covering him with her body. At first, the hunters thought they were both dead. Then the boy stirred. He was warm because his sister had given him everything. Her fur coat, her mittens, her warmth. She lay in the snow in just a shirt, her lips blue and her pulse barely detectable. Park Ji-won fought for her for 2 days. 3rd-degree hypothermia, frostbite on both legs, on her hands, on her face. Dohyeon sat nearby, not because he could help, because he couldn't leave. The boy sat by the stove and said nothing. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat there and looked at his sister. His name was Sun Jin-ho. Her name was Sun Ari. They were the children of the prince of the small southern principality of Zhonghua. They were. Because the principality of Zhonghua no longer existed, the fire priests declared Prince Sun Hae-jun a heretic. The charge was simple. The prince refused to surrender his hearth, the ancestral fire, the family's only fiery artifact. The priests demanded it be handed over to the central temple for a ritual. The prince refused. 3 days later, the priest's army entered Chonghua. The castle was burned. The prince was executed. The princess was executed. Ari's older brothers were executed. She managed to escape with her younger brother through an underground passage that only she knew about because she had played there as a child. 2 months of wandering. In the south, they were being hunted. In the west, they were being captured. In the east, they were being turned away. That left the north. The White Death. A place from which no one returns. She headed north because she had heard rumors of a city in the ice, about a prince who welcomes everyone. 2 months in winter with her 6-year-old brother in her arms, without food, without money, without hope. Only rumors. And she made it. On the 3rd day she opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was a stone ceiling, warm air, the light of a lamp, and the face of the boy who was sleeping next to her on a fur rug, curled up in a ball and holding her hand close to him. The second thing she saw was Dohyeon. He was sitting against the wall with a drawing on his lap. He wasn't drawing. He was looking at her. She tried to stand up. She couldn't. Her legs wouldn't obey her. The frostbite was severe. Park Ji-won said she would walk again, but not soon, and not like before. Dohyeon approached. He sat down next to her. He didn't speak. He waited. She spoke first, quietly. Her voice was like a whisper. She asked where they were. He answered. She asked if it was true that he was a prince. He replied that he had been a prince. Now he was a builder. She was silent. Then she said she knew how to count. She said her father had taught her to keep the books, and that by the age of 14 she was managing the principality's treasury because the treasurer drank and her father trusted her more. She said this so quietly and so matter-of-factly, as if she were talking about someone else. Dohyeon listened. Then he said he needed someone who could do the math, that the Northern Light Principality was growing faster than he could keep up with, that they now had 2 cities and trade agreements and a mine and supplies for thousands of people, and all of it needed to be counted, recorded, and monitored. He said that if she agreed, the treasury and all logistics would be hers, completely, without oversight, because he trusted the people who carried his younger brothers through the White Death. Ari looked at him. Her lips trembled. Not from the cold. She nodded. A week later, she began working. Lying down, Park Ji-won wouldn't let her get up. Dohyeon brought her everything there was. Soo-hyun's supply records, Cho In-ho's trade documents, Min-soo's reports on the first contract, population lists, records of iron from the mine, all on scraps of leather and pieces of birch bark. Chaos. Ari looked at this chaos for about 2 hours. Then she asked for charcoal and flat stones. By evening, she had a record-keeping system, double-entry bookkeeping, income and expenses, each category separately: grain, meat, iron, cloth, people. Everything with dates, everything with numbers. 3 days later, she knew more about Seolgyeon than Dohyeon. She knew that grain reserves would last 40 days, that meat would last 50, that 20 pounds of iron were mined per week, but 30 were consumed, that the trade balance was negative because they were buying more than they were selling, that if they didn't increase exports, the deficit would become critical in 2 months. She came to Dohyeon with these figures and placed a stone covered in neat columns in front of him. She spoke calmly, without emotion, just facts. Dohyeon listened and felt something inside him relax. For the first time in a year, someone had taken on part of the burden he had been carrying alone. Not walls, not weapons, not defense. Numbers. That invisible work without which everything else would collapse. He thanked her. She blinked, looked away, then returned to her stones. That night, Soo-hyun told Dohyeon that Ari had fallen asleep without screaming for the first time in 2 weeks. Before that, she had screamed every night, in her sleep. The same name, over and over. Father. The second year was gaining momentum. The Principality of Northern Light now existed not only as a fact, but also as an idea. 3 cities, Seolgyeon, Cholsong, and the new third, Ponghwa. A beacon, a trading post on the southern pass through which caravans passed. Min-soo had secured agreements with the 3 southern principalities. Not alliances, trade agreements. Formally, the principalities did not recognize Northern Light. Informally, their merchants came every week.
Iron from the Cholsong mine went south. Taheo's frost-resistant steel cost 10 times as much as ordinary steel because it didn't break in winter. Bone goggles for snow blindness became a fashion item in the southern markets. Barley grain and timber went north. Soljan ate. Soljan was being built. Soljan grew. The fire priests declared a crusade in the height of summer of the second year. Dohyeon learned from Min-soo, whose agent in the capital had relayed the news. High priest Hwa Chang-soo delivered a sermon in the temple. He called Dohyeon the heresy of ice. He said that his very existence was an insult to the heavens. He said that the prophecy that ice would give birth to a new lord was not a promise, but a threat, and that the threat must be destroyed before it is too late.
So Gyeongjae supported him. Of course he did. He needed a reason to raise a new army after the loss of 20,000 of Han Junmo's men. The priests gave him that reason. A holy war. Against the heresy of ice. Against the rebellious prince. For the fire. For the throne. For order. The crusade was gathering strength. According to Kwon Dae-ho, by fall the priests would have between 30 and 40,000. Not professionals, fanatics, militiamen, but numbers mattered. Dohyeon listened to the reports and thought, not with the system, with his head. The system provided figures and calculations. His head provided strategy. He couldn't defend indefinitely. Walls and cold would stop one army, 2, 3. But sooner or later, an army large enough or well enough prepared to break through would come. And then everything he had built would burn. He had to get out, beyond the White Death, to the south, to where his system was weakening, but his body remained as it was, a boy without a sword. But that was where fate was decided, in the capital, at court, in the corridors of power where a word is worth more than an army. He needed Jong Ha-in, his half-sister, the princess who remained at court, his only ally within the walls. Through Min-soo he sent a letter, a secret one, through 3 hands, from a merchant to a smuggler, from the smuggler to a maid, from the maid to the princess. The reply came a month later. Ha-in wrote tersely, to the point, like someone who knows that every word could cost a life. She agreed to a meeting. Neutral territory, the trading city of Hamgyong on the border of the southern principality, in 2 months. One condition: he comes alone. The summer of the second year, Dohyeon was heading south for the first time since his awakening. For 14 months he had lived in the cold, and the system had run like clockwork. Now, with every step south, he felt it fading. At the pass, the temperature was -15, and the interface flickered. In the foothills, it was -5, and the data came in with a delay. On the plain, where the snow gave way to brown earth and the air was above freezing, the system fell silent. It didn't shut down. It just went quiet. Like a radio on the edge of its range. Snippets. Fragments. Nothing to rely on. He walked alone, as promised. Without the system at full strength, he was who he was. A 20-year-old boy in a stranger's body. Skinny, short, with a face that had grown harder over the year but still betrayed his youth. Travel clothes. A cloak made of southern fabric that Min-soo had given him. A knife under the cloak. One. Not a weapon. A habit. Tae-ho had forged it specially. Light, sharp, with a handle that fit Dohyeon's palm. A pouch of silver at his belt. Around his neck, a medallion bearing the House I crest.
which So-yeon had carved from bone and given him before leaving. Silently, with a face from which he averted his gaze because he couldn't bear what was written on it. Hamgyong turned out to be a dirty, cramped little town at the crossroads of trade routes. Stench, noise, crowds of people in bright clothes he'd grown unaccustomed to seeing. After a year and a half of white and gray, the colors hit his eyes like a physical force. And the heat. 20 degrees above zero, maybe 22. For the locals, a typical summer day. For him, torture. A body accustomed to sub-zero temperatures couldn't handle the heat. Sweat poured in streams. His head was spinning. The system was completely silent, and he felt blind. No surface temperatures, no wind direction, no calculations, no prompts.
Hey true fan, want videos YouTube will never see? Join me on Patreon, link in description.